Hello gang, welcome to another episode of Tier List Slop with the Turbo Munculus. Today we are ranking Warframe's second abilities. This is going to be a bit of a lengthy one, so get your snacks, get your drinks, go do your chores. This will primarily be an audio experience, so you can feel free to set me down and listen as you please. The abilities here are going to be rated on how strong they fit their kit in a general sense. I'm going to try to balance the ability out on its own merit, but also how it complements the kit, right? The main example I use here is Sevagoth's Reap and Sevagoth's Sow. Together they make one of the most broken combos in the game, but one, on their own, they're a little less significant, but still solid. Augments are here to be considered as well. I'll make it clear when an ability is kind of a bum fraud without its augment, and that will be somewhat weighed against the ability because that's modding freedom that you lose. I wish I didn't have to make this rule, but there are a lot of abilities in Warframe that are augment crutched, and it's pretty frustrating, so it does need to be mentioned. Helmet abilities will have their helmet status recognized, and that does alter how they're ranked, because of course that means they can go into other frames, have more synergies. Even if the ability isn't excellent within its own Warframe, it means on other Warframes it can do really, really well. Best example would be Jade Stars, obviously, which is going to be featured on this list, of course. So let's jam. Like, sub, hype, comment. Thank you guys so much for the support. I love you guys to death. Thank you for the opportunity and the blessing to make Warframe videos for you guys. Again, every video is an invitation for discussion, so leave a comment, all that good stuff. Love you guys lots, and let's get started. While I'm still trying to model out how I really want my tier lists to look, this is kind of what I've decided. I think S, A, B, C, and a rework tier is necessary. Rework doesn't necessarily mean the most catastrophically awful thing. It just means that I think this ability needs to be adjusted more than it needs to be ranked. S is going to be the upper 25%. A is like kind of in that middle zone, 50%. It's just like quartiles, right? So C doesn't necessarily mean the ability is awful. It just means it's kind of in the bottom 25% of abilities in terms of how strong I think they are. Obviously, these aren't going to be even quartiles, not even close. Warframe's design has gotten a lot better over time, reworks, all that good stuff. But just kind of keep that in mind, that these four tiers should encompass most of what's going on here. But a lot of abilities do have some wiggle room, and I'll try to explain when I do have personal bias, because that obviously comes up, as I am a human, believe it or not. Alrighty, moving in alphabetical order here, starting with Ash, who I feel like we're going to start with for the rest of time now. Smokescreen is being placed in the A tier. So this ability basically has Ash throw down a little smoke bomb, cloaks himself, stuns enemies real fast, which is pretty relevant. But this ability used to be a lot worse. It has since a while ago had its duration doubled, which is really good. The augment is quite solid, Smoke Shadow. This also has a conclave augment I've never heard of in my entire life, called Tear Gas. Smoke Shadow basically lets Smokescreen be used on teammates, which turns them invisible and also gives them that critical chance buff that Smoke Shadow provides. It's a 150% multiplicative buff, so if hopefully you're using crit and you can kind of gain advantage from that. Also, your teammates getting that advantage could be pretty good. Just it's invisibility, which is really great, and critical chance, which we want. Now, one thing about, again, invisibility already kind of lays the groundwork for being an A tier ability, in my opinion, because it is Ash's way he stays alive. This means that Ash maybe builds some duration, and then he just lives forever. That's how Invis generally works, and so it's really hard for an ability that gives consistent Invis to be bad. But Invis is a little bit different in Modern Warframe because of Arcane Crepuscular, which gives a critical damage multiplier that's really, really strong, along with some additional power strength as well. So the combination of Smokescreen's critical chance with the critical damage multiplier that Crepuscular, and Crepuscular, you do take it on most Invis frames. Not all, but most, because the multiplier from it is really good, and the niche effect of turning invisible is not on a lot of frames. So generally, when you can take Crepuscular, you end up taking it. And so we have this case where Smoke Shadow gives a bunch of critical chance. If you're using Wrathful Advance like I am, you get even more critical chance. And the critical damage from Crepuscular and all of your modding allows you to do stuff with either weapons platforming or Blade Storm or melee, whatever you want to do. Smokescreen basically enables all of that while keeping you alive. So it gives you tons of damage, tons of potential. It also synergizes with Blade Storm to make it a more efficient ability to use. It can be easily refreshed with the, I believe, the teleport augment. Yeah, right. So it's really, really easy to use. It's really strong. And it keeps you alive while actually giving you a ton of damage. We'll talk about Loki in a little bit. I do think that Ash just has the better version of invisibility in this case, and it's the main thing that keeps him alive while giving him tons of damage. Next, we have Atlas's Tectonics, which is surprising to no one going into the rework tier. This ability basically creates a rock wall, which Atlas can then send forward and deal damage. Not very good damage at that, and not within a very good radius either. So Alice was obviously kind of the star of the show with our first abilities ranked. You should go check that video out if you want. Landslide genuinely carries this entire Warframe at such an impressive degree. If you've played Alice, you know why this isn't great. It's nice to have a Helmut slot, ultimately. Like, I'll never complain about that, and it's part of the main reason I don't think Alice is getting reworked anytime soon. I do have a Tectonics rework script done. If that's something that interests you, you can let me know in the comments. I usually the rework content just gets a little less views, so I don't always feel like I need to post it. I kind of let it sit there. But yeah, this ability is really bad and really not worth using. But it does have an equally useless augment, so keep that in mind as well. Talking about Banshee's Sonar, which is obviously going into S tier. This ability was just way ahead of its time. Basically, this ability just marks enemies with little points on them that you can shoot and deal massively increased damage. So it is effectively a debuff you have to cast quite frequently, but because of Resonance, it's Augment, which if you kill enemies with the weak spot kills that Sonar provides, it will just basically just recast Sonar for the remaining duration, which means you don't have to spam cast it very much at all, especially in optimal settings. Obviously, if you're in like a more high mobility setting where you have to move around a whole lot to different places, it might be less optimal, but if you're on like defense, setting, like survival, whatever, it's really easy to use. S tier, always, ability is insane. One thing I noticed, only when making the Banshee guide, is that honestly the numbers on this ability are just way ahead of its time for how old this ability is. Like 35 base radius and 30 base duration. These are like insane numbers for an ability this good. Additionally, obviously the sonar points, they can essentially overlap, which causes you to be able to proc them twice, and they multiply then twice, which is how you get damage cap with fishing rods. It's really that simple. This ability is one of the best damage amplifiers in the game. It is such a good damage amp that Banshee is playable despite half of her kit being like almost worthless. All you have to do is invest into survivability, and Sonar will do all of your damage for you. It's absolutely ridiculous. This frame is like pretty good. Next for the rework, I have a guide on her if you want to watch that. I think it's really good, and a video talking about you know, why her play rate has been the lowest, despite her being like kind of fine. So yeah, S tier, Sonar is amazing, love it to death. BARUUK and his lull. This basically creates a field that puts enemies to sleep and, more importantly, erodes BARUUK's restraint. The restraint meter is the meter that BARUUK needs to basically corrode in order to use his ultimate Serene Storm, which is his main thing that he has going on. I don't know if this is a hot take, but I'm pulling lull into C tier. I don't think the sleep effect of lull is useful basically at all for BARUUK. There's also cases where, like a lot of cases actually, where you go as negative duration as you can in order to keep the enemies as as awake as possible while sleeping them for 0.62 seconds in order to, or for 2.5 seconds I guess, in order to basically have them wake up right away so you can lull them again and continue to erode your restraint again to use Serene Storm. The ability is basically the restraint eroder, and I'm someone who, when I'm grading abilities, especially here, I don't super care about how the ability is designed. I do care a little bit of how it works in with the kit, but in this case, lull is just, you press 2, you erode restraint. That's what it is. Now, can you use it in sleep situations? I guess, sure. It is BARUUK's Helmut ability as well. I just don't see this ability as one that's particularly useful outside of eroding restraint. There's other ways to erode restraint. I would say most BARUUK players would argue that lull is the best way to do it. I would agree with that opinion. I just think that it's a little bit boring of an ability that doesn't do much besides let you use another ability better. And so for me, that's C tier. I believe this basically can keep lull up. I don't really fully understand this one. I believe it basically lets your lull remain on the ground. Lull is different than like a lot of the other sleeps, and I believe it's tied to an area. And so the augment, I guess, can keep enemies asleep, but just BARUUK, that's not really in BARUUK's interest. He doesn't really care. He wants to kill everything with Serene Storm and have a bunch of enemies to hit. And so lull, again, it's just kind of a dud ability in my opinion, outside of, again, eroding restraint. Caliban's Sentient Wrath is going into B tier. Basically, this just has Caliban smash the ground, little 360 around him, enemies get suspended upwards, primed with Tau, and give a damage vulnerability. The base number on this is shockingly low, which is why I'm putting it into B tier. Part of that, it does hit in a pretty solid range. Its base range is quite good. Tau priming is respectable. I just think that, again, it's an ability you have to spam cast. That's always going to be annoying. It's some extra damage, but like not a whole bunch of extra damage. in these cases, these damage vulnerability things end up being kind of like worse roars, but like B tier is still, this is a good ability. B is a good ability when it's combined with Razor Gyre and Gyre Mortar, or Razor Mortar, that's what it's called, right? Yeah, like this is really good. Tau is really good. But this ability itself, again, I don't know why the damage vulnerability number here is so low. I feel like a lot of the other damage vulnerability sources end up with a lot higher numbers, more like 50. But yeah, this is still a good ability. And again, this is kind of a trademark. Most of these kind of have to recast. Damage debuffs are going to end up in the B tier. So CHROMA and his elemental ward, basically CHROMA, depending on the colors he has selected in his energy slot, gains different buffs. They basically usually have like 2 effects each, so usually it's a stat increase, with toxin its holster amp, with heat its health, with cold its armor, with electric its shielding, and then you have like an actual warding effect around you that deals damage or has special properties. Cold reflects damage, kind of like regardless, which is like pretty strong. I believe electric is like a more focused damage redirection. Heat is supposed to have a heat aura, and toxin has like 5% max health damage, which can be pretty cool with like a friend like INAROS. I'm putting this into like C and rework tier. I like elemental ward. I think it's neat. It's just really, really old. I think it's probably the hottest take I have on here. I think that obviously, like when people think CHROMA, they think elemental ward, Vex armor, right? That's what they think. Elemental ward's kind of, you just get some upfront stats and then an AoE effect that does like nothing for you. The numbers on this are just so old. I do think the augment Everlasting Ward is actually quite good, because it actually means you don't have to build range, which is super sick. It means you can kind of just run up and give your teammates a big hug, and they get the entire minute of your elemental ward in this case, which is really, really good. I actually like the augments design a lot. Wouldn't really change that. But I do think the actual elemental ward, the damaging field itself, should have higher than a 10% status chance here on heat. It is a different status chance per. I know this ability can do cool things. I understand that this is kind of CHROMA's entry into persistence, makes it really easy with the cold, whether you're looking for the armor or if you're just looking for the health to make persistence more comfortable. Then you have both those options for you. There's the melee influence weird stuff with the way that cold works, the armor damage redirection, but that's kind of borderline like not bug abuse, because that's like dramatic language, but it's not really an intended feature of the ability. Not that I think DE is going to fix it anytime soon, but I don't think we should be counting those unintended interactions in the favor of abilities all the time, especially in the case of Elemental Ward. I believe that's so just like crazy old. I like this ability. I would like to see it reworked and changed. I have a CHROMA rework out if you want to watch it, where I think I do a lot of great things with this Warframe. You should check that out, but really, see, rework, whatever. I'm just not a huge fan of this one. CITRINE's Preserving Shell is going into the S tier. I'm kind of confused on this one. I really do feel like there's an argument for A tier here. I just think giving your entire team 90% DR is really, really strong. It's DR that it's up, getting the uptime on it is insanely easy. Also, like, again, in the context of CITRINE is really important here, especially when we're talking about non-helmet abilities, right? Because they can only be used with her. CITRINE heals as well. So CITRINE has this passive heal where basically, so when you're healing, you're not really healing, like in this case, I think her passive caps out at 25, right? You're healing 25, but that 25 then proceeds to get 90% DR, right? Like, you see what I mean? Like, that's really a lot stronger, especially when we're talking about like lower levels. And when I say lower levels, I mean like 200, like 300. As far as I'm concerned, like, you're kind of unkillable, and you've made your team kind of unkillable, while also having this insane damage kit through Prismatic Gem, and Jade Star. In my case, Jade Stars, but like really Prismatic Gem and Preserving Shell are this character's kit. I love Crystallize, but not a lot of people use that ability, unfortunately. Yeah, Preserving Shell just keeps your whole team alive, keeps you alive, and altogether, I think it's really good. If you are someone who really undervalues DR, which is fair, I think if you're a level capper, you kind of don't really care about DR all that much. But in this case, you can also like stack DR with things like Eclipse and Total Eclipse to make your whole team completely invulnerable. Like, not really, but like stacking DR is an insane effect, essentially, right? And so if you're someone who doesn't really care for DR, then you might say this is more of an A tier. But to me, being able to give that DR to your entire team, maybe stack more onto yourself, or again, use like Total Eclipse or whatever, Null Star, and that's just going to make you really, really hard to kill, especially with the built-in healing that your kit has, with you having to do nothing for it. Cyto 9, my beloved, and Resupply. Resupply is one of the easiest S tiers I'll cough up on this list. Basically, Cyto 9 has these ammo packs that you can specialize, just put in whatever element you want, essentially, and it throws out 3 of them, so 1 that reloads your weapon, so free weapon reload speed is no longer a concern to you anymore, and then 2 more that you can go pick up later to preserve energy if you need to for some reason with Arcane Sculptor. That's very unlikely. That's another reason this is broken. Its ability to proc Sculptor means like Cyto 9 is just not eating up as much energy as maybe he would before, with either helmet abilities or neutralize. And then you get a free status proc, so if you're using like a single target focused weapon, gas blast are free. You no longer have to deal with modding those onto your weapon. Super great. Also, there's just extra straight up damage, and then if you're using a sniper rifle, that extra damage is then doubled. The synergies with this, things like the Sobek, a lot of like single target weapons that just benefit from having blast on there. There's so much good stuff going on with Resupply. And like, obviously I hate giving out S's just because something's like a really good Sobek merchant. But ultimately that's that's Sight's strongest build. It's not one I use or will ever use. I think it's an affront to God personally, but it's really, really strong. And I think Resupply is S tier without it personally. Just being able to get whatever element you want, the amount of modding freedom that gives you is incredibly good. And it is also just additional damage as well. And it gives it to your whole team if they elect to pick the ammo packs up. So Resupply, S tier, really no question about it. S tier ability on an S tier frame. DAGATH's Doom. This might be a longer conversation. I am semi-prepping for a DAGATH guide at some point in the future. This frame is really interesting to me, but I'm putting Doom in B tier. Basically what this does is you mark enemies in front of you in a 40-degree angle. Yikes. You can spread it with weird sights very effectively, but basically Doom will have you store some of the damage you deal to them into damage that is dealt later, or once that damage becomes stored, that would become lethal to the target, it just executes them, which steals kills. That's a problem. Galvanized Chamber is one of the, and Galvanized Fusion, I guess, by extension. All those Galvanized mods, really, that have kills as their condition, are some of the most equipped mods in the game, if not the most equipped mods in the game. They are incredibly, incredibly popular. I'm sure before Acuity, there was basically just a slot designated to it, right? Those kind of mods are incredibly important to people to stack. They give a lot of stats. Doom can steal from them, which is very annoying. Additionally, damage creep has gotten pretty intense in this game, and I think that, you know, damage, would you like some damage with your damage, is a fine effect. That's what Roar does, that's what Nourish does, like all sorts of things, right? I get it. Doom is just like a less, it's a more interesting way to do that, but the problem is you're already going to overkill the enemies anyway. The only time, like, there's many times where we won't get to see Doom do the thing, and even when Doom is doing the thing, it's hard to tell that's doing the thing, which is very weird player feedback. Like, I think that's an interesting stat to be looked into. Some of the most impactful abilities in Warframe are not flashy at all, right? Which I find super interesting. So I think Doom is B tier. I think you can make the case for A tier very handily if you wanted to. I just think that this ability is usually unnecessary, and I'd rather have some more upfront damage, some different kind of utility, especially in the way that Doom and Weird Scythes, that's how you need to spread it. It's super annoying. I think if we're talking like Grave Spirit and using Doom that way, maybe it's a different conversation, because of course, like, again, there's a lot of, in DAGATH's kit, Rakali's Cavalry benefits from Doom, Grave Spirit benefits from Doom, but Spectral Spirit lets you, again, Grave Spirit and Spectral Spirit, they let you get Doom on the weapon, and so to me, like, that just seems really good. I think only, what is it, Spectral Spirit only lets you have weapons, weapon fire with Doom. Anyway, yeah, if we're talking like Doom as just the ability, the 2 ability that you press and you have to spend with Weird Scythes, I think B tier is very acceptable. Again, it's a cool ability. I love the premise, but in modern Warframe, where damage is just power crept out the wazoo, it's just not nearly as good as I would like it to be. Okay, this is kind of weird. I'm putting Dante's Light Burst in A tier. I know that sounds really stupid, and that's very fair. You could put it in B tier if you want to. But ultimately, like, if you just press Light Burst enough times to give yourself arthritis, you can kind of cap yourself out on Overguard and do the same thing that Dante normally does with Triumph, just really, really slow. So B tier is fine, but I think A tier is actually correct. Giving yourself, in this case, 1,000 Overguard, basically on command, that'll go up after Augmented and Impetus, whatever. Is probably what, on average, like 1,200 Overguard with 1 button press is pretty good. We have things like Frost's Icy Avalanche, we have things like Ember's Heat, whatever it is, that thing's garbage. But things like Recompense, right? And we're able to give ourselves lots of Overguard. Life Burst is the same thing. Dante just has a really good built-in version of it, but if I could put Life Burst in other frames, I'd probably consider it in a few cases, especially with Arcane Truculence. So yeah, Light Burst is just a great way to protect yourself. Obviously, Dante has Triumph, so you don't have to do that. But if I had to, I would, and I don't think it would be a bad thing to do. Not sure if that's a hot take, but yeah, Light Burst goes into A tier for me. Ember's Immolation is joining Dante in the B tier. Honestly, there's a case to be made for C tier, but I don't really think that I don't really think that 90, it's really hard for 90% damage reduction to end up in C tier in my opinion. So B tier is where it's landed. It's, of course, you have to build it up, but building it up isn't super hard to do. The only problem is that engaging with Immolation is incredibly difficult. I do think this ability 100% needs a rework. I'll probably get that labeled into my tier list, but yeah, this ability, if you want to interact with the rest of what Ember has going on, namely Fire Blast, to strip armor in like a pretty good area, then you discharge some of your DR, and the difference between like 90 and 95, 75 and 90 DR is that's large. That's a lot, and so losing your DR even for a little bit can be very scary, especially if you're not running something like Eclipse or whatever to stack the DR. In this case, I run Null Star, and these two together does a really solid job. Immolation goes into B tier. It's good DR. It just has the rest of the kit that seems to like eat away at it, and so you can either over tank, over gate, or you can just stack DR. But it feels like this kit needs to be changed. Like literally, I think 2 changes to Ember would basically fix her up real nice. But yeah, the B tier Immolation makes sense to me. Good ability, just on a frame that seems to not want it there sometimes. Despite the Equinox main community probably going to leak my IP address, I think Rest and Rage is a C tier ability. I think the concept of what Rest and Rage does is cool. I think both forms make a lot of sense. The problem is, first let's got a wake up health threshold, which isn't great. You don't really want that, especially at 50%. I think that, I don't remember if that's moddable. I don't think it is though. 50% is kind of bad, right? Certain enemies can wake up and still be a problem, especially true Equinox, who has no real way to defend herself. But what the ability does is basically has you either cast damage vulnerability at someone and spreads into AoE, or sleep them, basically, which is actually really good in conservation. The problem is the base range is 5 meters on both of these. What the word I won't say on YouTube right now. What were we thinking? This is a very outdated number. If this number just got changed to 10, Equinox would instantly feel at least a little bit better. Damage vulnerability is good. The base number is 50. Luckily, Equinox already wants to max range for MAME, so like this number doesn't look so bad, but this is 14 meters on an ability with max range. Protea's turrets shoot 70 meters. Putting someone to sleep or giving them damage vulnerability like Caliban does, 14 meters. That's insane. So yeah, the ability is numerically bad. Conceptually, it's fine, but I think the numbers are genuinely so bad, and especially with the augment could be so cool. You could spread the debuff to make it so you don't have to recast, but its base range is also 5. So yeah, this is probably one of the most pressing changes Equinox needs, and I hope she gets it soon. I'm not going to say rework because that's not really accurate. It's just a number buff that's needed. I think conceptually it's fine. Well, Immolation conceptually bothers me. This ability does not conceptually bother me. It just has a weirdly bad number that feels like some sort of like mistake. Excalibur and Excalibur Umbras, Radial Blind and Radial Howl. The main difference being, of course, the animation and the ability to shed sentient resistances, which is pretty cool. Radiant Howl, Radiant Finish being the augment. This is just an AoE blind. Radiant Finish has them taking more finisher damage. So you get a stealth damage multiplier, you get CC, which is pretty nice. I'm putting this into B tier. I could see C tier. This is the ability that gets removed from Excalibur basically every single time, provided you are using Exalted Blade, which you probably should be, given Chromatic Blade and whatnot. But there are melee weapons that are more fun to use, right? Obviously, this build I have here is for a different melee weapon, of course, right? So yeah, I don't think this ability is... yeah, I'll put it in the B tier, but I do think that C tier makes a lot of sense. If you're doing this with finishers, I do genuinely think Radiant Finish is kind of crazy. You could amp that further with like Wrathful Advance or Savage Silence or other multipliers like that, especially with the new Prisma, or not, the Obex Incarnate, right? Or for stacking Crescendo for some reason. Like there's reasons to like want something like that. The Stealth multiplier is quite good. This is just more damage straight up while getting CC. The problem is like the layer of CC doesn't really ever help Excalibur that much. With Excalibur, it's pretty much your signed the contract that your ass is shield gating for the foreseeable future with slash dash, and that's kind of all she wrote. It's probably the most mod effective way to play Excalibur. I don't know. I would like to see them add like life steal to Exalted Blade. I don't know if that's a stupid idea, but or maybe it's like Radial Javelin. I don't really know. But yeah, this ability's fine. It's the blind is nice. The finisher damage is nice. If you play into it, I do think that I do think Radiant Finish is genuinely quite the good augment. But the problem is if you're not, you're just getting some extra stealth multiplier, which is fine. Next, we have Follie's Shadow Graph. It's S tier. It's one of the best single abilities in the entire game. I think that, again, I have a whole Follie guide. You should go check it out. It's one of my longer pieces, but it does kind of teach you extensively about what this ability can do. All sorts of paintings, the main one being the Explosive Barrel, of course, which deals just an insanely stupid upload, like upfront 65% max health damage. You combine that with Roar, you combine that with Viral, you're one-shotting up to level cap, no problem. All the other pieces, all other drawings do have some unique utility. The Loke Surge can basically give you infinite energy, infinite health, all sorts of like random weird things that are going on if you're doing kind of like long duration missions. You could pull aggro with the defense capsule. There's all sorts of things you could do with Shadow Graph. It does kind of depend on the skill of the player and the willingness to use the rest of it. But even if Shadow Graph was only the Explosive Barrel, this would be an S tier ability regardless. It's just able to nuke really, really effectively and really, really easily without much input from the player, especially if you use something like Tempest Barrage. It's really, really strong. I think that the Loke Surge and the Explosive Barrel, the Arc Trap's also super good. The Death Orb, again, I think most of the drawings are actually pretty solid. You can speed up certain niche game types, like you can kind of skip an entire rotation of, Disruption, right? You can make Alchemy easier. You could do a lot of other weird niche things. But that's just tagged on to the most broken ability ever, which is, again, the Explosive Barrel. So, again, with Follie, it's very simply S tier, super broken ability, very, very strong, but also has a bunch of other cool things tagged onto it. Next, we have Frost's Ice Wave. This one's going straight into the rework tier. It is so comically bad. Now, basically just fire out a little triangle that puts cold procs onto enemies and deals heavy damage. Okay, sure, D. Whatever you say. Yeah, this is completely useless. I'd like to see it converted into something that either does like some substantial damage in some way, or some sort of util, maybe like damage vulnerability. I don't know. Frost is kind of a support in these days, and he's a really, really good one. So overall, I would love to see literally anything else than this ability. Again, having a helmet slot is great. That's why I don't think it's going to get reworked anytime soon, but this is probably takes the cake for the worst 2 ability in the game. GARA's Splinter Storm is going into S tier, as I'm sure you could guess. Essentially what this ability does is, well, everything. You basically create a kind of area of shrapnel that either can surround you, surround an enemy, surround an ally. When it's on you, it gives up to 90% DR. When it's on an enemy, it gives them damage vulnerability. This just allows GARA to do everything. But that's not all. This Splinter Storm basically amasses damage through breaking your Mass Vitrify is the main way it's done, and this can infinitely scale to give yourself a massive range kill aura, essentially, where you can just run through enemies and give them big hugs and they just explode, provided you build it properly. Splinter Storm is one of the most overloaded, hilarious abilities ever. I think it's hilarious. You can put it on teammates to defend them, to give them kill aura, like... There's a lot you can do, especially if you're a very active player. You can get like multiple Splinter Storms going. As far as I understand, this ability is really, really fun, really, really good. Most GARs will just use it pretty selfishly, as again it gives you that DR, which you definitely want. You could refresh it using again Mass Vitrify and Shutter Lash. I haven't done much with the augment. I don't think I ever will. I'd like to see the number on Mending Splinters buffed. It just heals the target affected, which is like interesting enough, but I don't think it's very good. You're welcome to prove you wrong. I've never used it, but just, reading numbers. Splinter Storm is really, really strong. It does literally whatever you want it to, and it's strapped to GARA. So yeah, it's pretty broken. S tier for Splinter Storm. Fits pretty well. Garuda's Blood Altar is up next, and this ability is going to C tier. This ability is kind of the defining ability where I explain why I have the C tier and the rework tier. Blood Altar is not a bad ability. It's just the context of Warframe is like, hey, you don't really need this. Like, you have Helminth, buddy. like for me personally, I just used Lifesteal Furious on Garuda, but of course there's other ways to get health back. I have a Reeve build. Like there's all sorts of stuff you can do when it comes to Garuda. Blood Altar, again, you just kind of put an enemy down and like onto the altar and it heals in a radius, and that is just not a really good effect in Modern Warframe when you have a helmet system where you can give yourself all sorts of other abilities, and Garuda's other 3 abilities are insane. So of course, naturally, you're going to want to replace this one. Again, I don't think Blood Altar is not like a bad design ability. It doesn't do anything inherently wrong. It's just like not good. It's just when you have Helmet, there's no reason to like actually give it any kind of assessment. I believe this Blood Altar can do things on other Warframes. It's just mostly niche interactions. I think you used to be able to do stuff with Mag at some point, maybe Trinity. I'm not really sure. But ultimately, I will just be giving it a C tier until further notice. I do love Garuda. I think she's one of the best designed frames in the game. And I think Blood Altar is a good part of her design, but with where Warframe is at currently, it's just pretty useless, and that's okay. Gauss's Kinetic Plating. This basically has Gauss build up his battery, which builds up a source of DR. And this will allow him to gain immunity to a lot of status effects, staggering, knockdown, all that stuff. You can get up to insane levels of DR. I believe it caps out at 100 to my understanding the way it works. But not only that, so not only are you getting like a bunch of status immunity, unfortunately not to Toxin, like one of the only things that can kill Gauss properly. Not only are you're immune to knockdown, you're immune to a lot of statuses, and you're not only getting a bunch of DR with a very reasonable duration, the damage you take, while it does technically degrade your battery, this isn't really a huge issue until you get to higher levels. That damage you take gives you energy. It converts 5% of the, I believe, the post mitigation damage. It turns it into energy for you. So you can spam cast your Thermal Sunder and nuke the entire map. And then taking damage will no longer be an issue because there will be nothing to damage you alive. Kinetic Plating is going to S tier. I think this is one of the coolest abilities in the game. Now, Gauss is such a insane Warframe that you actually don't need it. He's got this it's basically a borderline like bug, it feels like, where he can basically max out on shield recharge because of his passive, and so Kinetic Plating's DR ends up not being necessary because you have infinite shield and shield regen. But it does give energy, right? It's not a useless ability, even if you are using that shield regen feature, quote unquote. Kinetic Plating still provides you with that knockdown immunity and that energy conversion from the damage you take. So still really, really good ability, even if you are using the shield gating stuff. Kinetic Plating, I love it to death. It's one of the best feeling abilities on Gauss. Very easy to cast and quite good duration on a frame that already builds a lot of duration as it is. So Kinetic Plating is an obvious S tier. Super, super good ability on a super, super good Warframe. Moving on to Gauss's best friend, Grendel, we have Nourish. Nourish is S tier. What Nourish does is essentially gives you a buff that makes it so when you or your enemies who you've kind of bestowed Nourish upon take damage, these viral spikes pop out, which do viral damage and proc viral. Very good. Your weapons now proc viral, and this can mess up some status weighting stuff, but if you're a good player, you know how to kind of work around that. This also gives you an energy multiplier to all incoming energy, which means that if you're kind of trying to like top off your energy econ, this can be a great way to do it because it gives you that viral damage, which is just always good. Viral status is always good. It's just more damage, right? So as long as you're not messing up your status weighting, that's pretty good. You're just priming viral freaking everywhere. It's insane. Nourish is worse on Grendel than it is other frames because of Grendel's anti-synergistic design, which I talk about in another video, right? If you want to go check that out. But yeah, ultimately, like, this ability is insane. No matter which way you spin it, whether it's on Grendel, still very good, or off Grendel, Nourish is one of the single best abilities in the entire game, and I love it a lot. Obviously, people get tired of Nourish slop, but this is on the man himself, so show him some respect. This ability is obviously very good. Never used the element before, to be honest, to clear status effects and give status immunity for each enemy in the stomach. Probably not necessary considering you're playing Grendel, but what do I know? Next, we have GYRE. Now, GYRE has Coil Horizon, which I'm placing into C tier cautiously. I'm pretty sure, I haven't experimented enough, but I believe that Coil Recharge, which basically allows you to recall the Coil Horizon, just doesn't do enough damage. It seems pretty interesting. Like, NIDUS's Larva kind of got a similar change in that it can be recasted for basically a nuke ability. But to my understanding, Coil Horizon isn't nearly as effective. I don't know for sure. If I'm wrong, of course, you can explain it to me in the comments. But Coil Horizon as a piece of grouping utility does have pretty insane range, and like it has its thrown range, right, which is like cool, and then you can recast it, so it actually has like more range than it reads, because you throw the ball out and then you group from there. So in my opinion, that's more range because you're not really casting on yourself as the center target. But in my opinion, if you're grouping, I've never seen this as the main choice for grouping. I think it's really interesting. I think the bowling ball concept is really fun. This is a fun ability. I have zero doubts about that. But in terms of efficacy of grouping enemies, I think it's definitely one of the weaker ones, despite it being super fun. Again, I could be wrong, and I could actually see this in the B tier. I think on GYRE herself, this is definitely just her weakest ability. Again, if I'm saying something wrong and the augment's broken, sue me, right? Like, totally valid, but I really do think this is GYRE's weakest ability, GYRE's weakest ability, and I don't think it's a very good helmet ability either. I will say I haven't done like my full due diligence, but just from the sniff test, from a little bit of gameplay, there are just better grouping utilities: larva, ensnare, pull, all that stuff. Next, we have HARROW's Penance. Basically, this is an effect that sacrifices all of your shields in order to give yourself reload speed, fire rate, lifesteal, and that duration is based on the shields that you have sacrificed. This also gives melee attack speed, which is pretty cool. It has a bit of annoying casting speed, but if you play a lot of HARROW, I'm a HARROW main, you know this ability is absolutely insane and gives HARROW a lot of his value. Now, I wish this ability did more for your teammates, but I'm going to put this in A tier. I think that this and Gauss's red line are like the two kind of creme de la creme options for getting fire rate and reload speed, and making a lot of weapons that suffer because they don't have those stats become really fun. Things like the Tromna, Kuva Chalker is one of my favorites. And this, combined with HARROW's ability to give that flat crit chance through Covenant and all that stuff, makes HARROW just a really fun weapons platform to play. I think the amount of stats it gives is insane. Again, HARROW has some weird stuff going on. Like, the lifesteal really means nothing to HARROW. Healing your teammates is great, don't get me wrong. And the amount of lifesteal is absolutely insane just on your weapons. It's crazy. But HARROW doesn't really use the lifesteal. He basically uses it to heal his teammates, and most teammates that are in the mission with you have their own healing plans. Otherwise, they would be dead. So, while this ability definitely has some like weird lost mileage, where like a lot of what it does doesn't end up getting used by you or your teammates, the fire rate, reload speed, and attack speed is all amazing. I use it with the Vinquibus all the time because you get to use both the melee attack speed and the reload speed and the fire rate, which is crazy. Probably one of the stronger synergies I've ever used. Yeah, Penance is A tier, just a very good ability in my opinion, and works with HARROW incredibly well. HILDRYN, and her Pillage. Pillage is S tier, one of the best abilities in the game. Yeah, basically all this does is sends out a wave that strips enemies of their armor and of their shields, and restores your shields in return. Now, the way this ability works is actually very interesting, and it's key to part of why it's so good. This ability sends out the wave, and the wave actually scales with your duration. So it's always been sent out, right? You're kind of just recasting it, so it gives you the shields back, which allows you to shield tank or shield gate, whichever one you want. But also it's the fact that its radius essentially scales with both range, though less effectively range, but also duration. So it uses both of those stats, and duration and range are stats that a lot of Warframes want and will use. So you can have a frame that uses very little range, but uses a lot of duration, and they get mileage out of Pillage. This ability is absolutely ridiculous. Its main downside, quote unquote, is if there's no enemies to steal from. So you're playing like either you're playing a full strip build, or you've somehow full stripped the room and now you can't get your shields back. That could be a shame. And the base value is 25%, which means you'll need 400% to full strip armor and shields, or in some cases if you use like corrosive projection, that can be less, but you don't really need a full strip anymore the way you used to have to way back in the day. This ability is nutty on HILDRYN. Obviously it's going to be nutty on whatever frame you put it on, especially if you have a lot of intent, right? There's a lot of things in this game where armor really hurts, right? So like, for example, GYRE rather, I don't know how I keep missaying that, but like GYRE has a hard time dealing ability damage to enemies that have armor. So Pillage allows you to strip that armor while also being tanky, giving yourself shields back. You can then use DR to keep that shield mileage going. Pillage is just a really good ability. It's an obvious S tier. Blazing Pillage only works with HILDRYN because you need Haven, and it's fine. It's basically a way to get the shields back if you don't have, if you're like against infested or whatever. Basically, the heat damage will restore shields back to HILDRYN. In my opinion, it's a bit of a waste of a mod slot, though I believe it used to be super good. I'd be curious to see if it could do anything with Jade stars. I'd be very curious to see that, and I might be checking it out soon. I just don't know what ability you'd remove in that case, because you would need Haven, and you would need Aegis Storm, and you'd want Pillage, and then you need Balefire because you can't use, but whatever. Anyway, that'd be something I'd be curious to see. But yeah, Pillage is S tier, whatever. Sorry for rambling. HYDROID's Tidal Surge. I love this ability, but it is just going to be going into the B tier for me. Basically, this has HYDROID turn into a wave and group enemies up. Looks pretty cool, functions pretty well. I would say the function is the part that comes up pretty short, but the main thing with Tidal Surge, and I think the thing that makes it pretty good, is actually called Tidal Impunity, which, first of all, this ability normally costs you 50 energy, but with Tidal Impunity, it gets cut down to 15, 1-5 instead of 5-0, quite good. Also, again, it clears status effects off of you, and then grants 12 seconds base of status immunity. That is really, really good, and it also in fact works on your teammates if you rush through them as the wave. This ability with melee HYDROID is some of the most fun you can have. I think it's an incredibly good ability. I think it's incredibly fun. Again, I don't think it's A or S tier, but like as an ability that's part of a kit like HYDROID's, which is pretty solid, right? That status immunity is great. The grouping's great. It just works. It's just a really, really solid ability that I like a lot. I wish the grouping functionality on it was better. I'd really like that, but overall, getting that status immunity, getting that mobility, and having it become cheaper, because, again, a big part of why this ability is good is the augment, but because the augment carries its weight, right, when it's put on the build, I feel like it's totally worth B tier. Simple as that. INAROS' Sandstorm has INAROS turn into a Sandstorm, grouping enemies up and healing himself. So the heal will basically heal you to full almost every single time. It's pretty good. It's a health per enemy thing. INAROS does have a pretty beefy health bar, but with Steel Path enemy density, you're going to have a great time. INAROS using persistence means that healing actually has a ton of value. Elemental Sandstorm, the augment, is actually really, really insane. As you can see, this current build is giving 300% status chance, along with a range increase. This uses your modded melee weapons stats, which means that you could very easily, if you're playing weapon platform INAROS, which is probably the main reason you think you're going to be doing, you're able to fully corrosive enemies with your Scarab Swarm, and then prime viral, prime heat, prime magnetic, literally whatever you want to prime. You just put the stuff onto your melee weapon, and it does it, right? Maybe you want to use like secondary irradiate, right? You could put radiation on your melee, and then elemental sandstorm prime that for you. I think it's one of the coolest augments in the game. I hope they add more things like that. I like it when abilities kind of are when weapons that you're not necessarily using that you usually keep holstered actually still get to have an effect, like melee Kareen, Praetos, parkour velocity, elemental sandstorm, all that stuff. This ability is going into B tier. I think it's really underrated. It's a really, really insane grouping tool, while also being a priming tool, while also being a healing tool, and an invulnerability tool. Sandstorm's, honestly, if you wanted to say Sandstorm's A tier, I would 100% say go for it. I think it's very, very worth it. It's just that like INAROS already kind of has a lot of great things going on, and I can't always, when you're playing a Warframe, you can't always perfectly assess how much of your success is attributed to one ability. Sometimes you can, right? Like, for example, Aegis Gale on HILDRYN. That's where most of your success is coming from, but like INAROS has a playing INAROS in 2026 is unironically really fun because you never have to worry about dying. He gets really good tools, and even though it's simple, it's still very fun. So yeah, Sandstorm goes into B tier. Honestly, borderline A tier. I think the ability is really solid and quite slept on, but that's about all. IVARA's a Navigator. This basically has you possess a projectile. This can be a lot of things: Grimoire projectile, arrow, Artemis bow shot. I think like the A-Grit remote detonating thing. Navigator is going into C tier, but this is another case of an ability rather, that I don't think is bad. I just think is niche. And if you have a build that uses it, it's very strong. But like the general, if you're picking up IVARA and trying to use her, I just think you're gonna not have a great time with it. The augment is good, giving the projectile punch through, giving a ton of critical chance to that projectile, incredibly good. Again, if you are having a build that circulates around using Navigator, this ability is good. The problem is that build is worse than most IVARA builds most of the time, which is a problem. But this ability is super fun, and there's ways to use it outside of like its own niches. Like, for example, if you're using like secondary outburst and the ceramic dagger and the grimoire, or another secondary that like there's a lot of cool things you can do with Navigator. I just think overall it's a slow and clunky ability in a game that has become less slow and clunky on an already slow and clunky frame where you kind of want to try to pick up the pace. But honestly, the damage you get from Navigator is hilarious. Using this ability is hilarious. I love it. I don't want to see it really changed. Maybe like some adjustments to make it better, sure. But I think Navigator is generally good, fun, but not really great in the modern kind of landscape of Warframe. I'm an IVARA player, so maybe I have some bias here, but I do think the ability is quite good. Maybe some changes to the way it scales, maybe some changes to make it like more AoE friendly, but the things it can possess, like the Zenistar, like the Grimoire bolts, all sorts of things that actually make it pretty good. It's just you're gonna have to jump through some hoops to get there, and I think to me that's kind of a huge slap in the face to someone trying to make this work. Jade and her Symphony of Mercy is a simple A tier. I think this ability just does a lot of cool stuff. It does none of it particularly amazingly, but I do think that every effect here is quite good. Synergizes well with herself, other Warframes, Helmet abilities. Jade has gotten catastrophically better. She is probably the single best beneficiary of Arcane Sculptor. Her new nuking build basically removed the energy constraints that ability once had, and so yeah, you get a lot here. Basically, you can rotate between power strength, which is quite a bit of it. Deathbringer is just a damage increase, and then the shield per second and shield recharge delay as well. Generally, you can use the shield one, swap to it to make yourself kind of near unkillable, which is really good. The power strength can buff Helmet abilities, buff your own abilities, and cycle back. And the Deathbringer you kind of have out most of the time, right? Depending on what build you're using. Of course, if you're using a caster build, maybe you'll keep the power strength on. But basically, you refresh the ability's duration by killing enemies affected by Judgment, which is really easy to proc because, again, that's currently the meta build, and Jade's Light is a really good ability, or Light's Judgment is a really good ability. So this ability does a lot of everything. It does it generally well, lets you swap between everything. Symphony of Mercy, I think, is incredibly good. Is it boring? Kind of, yeah. But it plays into Jade's game plan really, really well and enables her to do a lot of cool things. Gaining power strength is a very strong effect because it means that as you invest strength, you get more strength, which like sounds corny, but it just means that it kind of lowers the mod burden while also benefiting. Like if you're trying to get like a really strong strip on Ophanimize, for example, like how strong is chucking another 77% power strength at the problem? Turns out pretty good. It just means you get higher ROI on your strength scaling abilities, which is super good. Symphony of Mercy is just a great damage buff all across the board, whether it's you're doing it with the power strength, with the Deathbringer, and then also just having a button you can swap to allow you to have your shields keep you alive forever. Pretty great stuff. Lots of synergies, lots of strong stuff. A tier for Symphony of Mercy. Moving on to KHORA's Ensnare. I'm putting this into S tier, and this might be like a moderate overrate. I'm not really sure. I just think this is probably the single best grouping ability in the game. It groups everyone upright, so they're not ragdolled, which means you could do headshot stuff, other synergies. So you have a weapon with really good punch through, like the Arcoplasmor, line them up for headshots real easy. It can be cast from far away, similar to like how I mentioned with Coil Horizon, how you kind of roll it and then explode it, so it really has like a deceptively long range. This is the same, except it's point and click, and you don't have to recast. It just kind of works for you, while also spreading. With Whipclaw specifically, obviously this is a helmet ability, just like Coil Horizon. It happens to be better on KHORA, of course, naturally. Unless you're nourished, then maybe not so naturally. But even Ensnare, with the helmet system, it's just a really, really effective grouping tool. I would say it's maybe you could make the case it's a little less snappy than something like Larva and whatnot, but I do think Ensnare is just the single best piece of grouping utility you can have. It's really, really good. It works on Acolytes, which is insane, so you can kind of hold them down if that's maybe a pain point of your runs. Some frames do struggle against Acolytes. If that's a pain point in your runs, you can do that. If you're playing a frame like Zaku, who builds a lot of range, you're able to do that as well. Ensnare is just insane. It's very boring, don't get me wrong, but it works really well in KHORA and really well in other frames, and just does exactly what you ask of it, which is really good. It could be a slight overrate, in my opinion. I could see someone putting this in A tier, but when something is the best at what it does, at least in my opinion, then I feel like putting it in S tier makes a lot of sense, because what it does is very relevant. Well, this is probably the one that's going to get me thrown into a locker. I'm putting Omakuji into A tier. I think this ability is very good. Now, of course, you're getting the decrees, you're doing the unattributed damage. I have a full KOUMEI guide, which is a little bit old, and then I have a very recent KOUMEI decree tier list. Watch that video and you can understand how good this ability is. It is insane. What it's giving you is not just what the ability reads, it's not just even what the decrees read, right? You have to go on the wiki, blah, 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 which is BS, right? But of course, this ability has a very big restriction, and that it takes time. And if you have teammates that can do kills, blah, 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 this ability has problems. But here's the thing, like it's attached to KOUMEI. You're playing KOUMEI, you know what you signed up for, right? You're not playing KOUMEI to speedrun captures, that's for damn sure. So you're playing KOUMEI with the intent. You're going to have to use the augment. It's a bandit augment. Honestly, the bandit augment makes me want to throw it into B tier. But KOUMEI does have, like, not as many modding restrictions as the average Warframe because she uses a Mamori and, like, shield gating usually. Which means her modding space is actually pretty healthy. I could see this B tier. But anyone who's putting this shit into, like, rework tier or C tier or whatever I think is baiting, this ability is incredibly good. You just have to know what you're doing on KOUMEI. And I happen to know what I'm doing on KOUMEI. So there you go. Right, if you want to talk about it in the comments, or you need to be like, you want to like learn why I'm ranking this the way it is, first of all, watch my KOUMEI decree tier list, but also, like, I will obviously respond to your comment and help you out. This ability is incredibly good. It gives you all sorts of unattributed damage BS, which again, basically a bug, right? But again, Brozime kind of talked about this recently. There's a lot of weird things that DE is probably just never going to change. So I don't expect unattributed damage to be fixed anytime soon. Maybe it's just going to become a feature at some point. And Omokuji is really good. It gives KOUMEI a lot of insane power that ramps up a lot. And again, KOUMEI has a niche, right? I don't rate Titania for how she does in defense missions. I'm trying to put KOUMEI into the situation where you play KOUMEI, which is endurance, survival, defense, all that good stuff. But also I'm a KOUMEI player, so there's bias there for sure. But I think this ability is really good as long as you can accept its conditions and play with it properly. Moving on to the KULLERVO and fuck you, I'm not dying ability, also known as Recompense. This ability is super good. Basically, KULLERVO fires out a bunch of daggers that orbit him and then return. And basically, when the daggers hit a target, they go into the target and give overguard. Pretty good. This is very basic and used to basically give KULLERVO this gap in survivability though, because of course the knives would shoot out and then you have to recast Recompense. Basically, it became very unsustainable. So we have the augment, Volatile Recompense, which makes the daggers, instead of swinging out and stabbing, they just orbit KULLERVO. And this now made the ability completely broken. I think Recompense is probably A to B tier without Volatile Recompense, but with Volatile Recompense, it's must take on like every KULLERVO build in my opinion, especially if you're going into higher levels. This gives KULLERVO constant access to Overguard without you having to do anything besides play KULLERVO. It just fits into his playstyle so well. Gives him tons of overguard, lets him use like truculence if you decide you want to use that to prime viral. It's really good. KULLERVO basically cannot die as long as he has Volatile Recompense, and so for that it obviously deserves S tier to me. It's really a no-brainer. The cap on it isn't huge. The range on it is good enough, and the duration on Volatile is good enough to where this ability is just the ability that allows KULLERVO to not die and give overguard. And that's going to have to be good enough for me. KULLERVO is already a great frame, and so having an ability that you basically just press and never die again, as long as you're playing active and getting within that recompense range, you're all set. Any LAVOS truthers here? I'm putting Violet Rush into the C tier. This basically has LAVOS dive forward, and on his little trail of ice, this can be imbued with LAVOS's other elements, which is pretty cool. Again, LAVOS is one of the best designed warframes in my opinion. This also allows LAVOS to imbue with cold, right? And I don't think imbuing with cold is that great, right? Like, there's a lot of other elements that you probably want with LAVOS, but it's definitely not bad. The problem is the Violet Rush just isn't very good. We have the helmet system, which degrades this ability even further because LAVOS has some pretty insane helmet synergies. Like Evade is probably my favorite, Null Star of course, anything that scales with like those kind of weird weapon multipliers, right? Because Valence Formation is broken, so you're able to like abuse a lot of really strong things. Null Stars being like one of the main ones that I use constantly. Again, Violet Rush is just a movement ability that leaves a little trail. It's funny, it's silly, but again, in the modern year of our Lord with Warframe, it's just not very good. And that's okay, because I think it's fun. I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with it. I don't even care if it gets buffed or not. The ability is fine, and it fits into LAVOS' kit perfectly, and it does things. It gives him the cold, and it lets him imbue it to become like a priming tool, but there's just better ways to do it. Whether you want to use it or not, totally up to you. I think it's a fun, well-designed ability that just happens to not be very good. I don't know how to rank this guy. Okay, Limbo Stasis, I'm just gonna put into A tier. maybe have it reworked. What is this little, what's going on here? Are these the snakes from, ugh, anyway, okay. Basically, stasis has you freeze anything in the rift. So let's talk about Limbo, right? Limbo has this situation where if the way he plays the game is good, and the game mode probably sucks because you put the game on pause. I think they need to like figure out, I want this frame reworked so bad, but I will say that like stasis can definitely do a lot of really cool things. But again, putting the game on pause is generally pretty good. If you're able to rift bound enemies and play Limbo properly, then stasis is a really great tool that requires very little in the way of modding in order to keep yourself alive. So again, my Limbo knowledge is pretty limited, and I think at some point, provided he doesn't get reworked, I might like reach out to a Limbo one trick and like have them actually like coach me on how this frame works. But I generally don't like the frame state. I don't like his design. In the way that, like, again, if Limbo's good, then we're gonna have problems because his gimmick is to turn the game off. So even though his concept is very cool, I think the way that he executes his concept right now leads to DE wanting to kind of abandon him, essentially, which is a shame. But I'll put stasis in A tier. I'll humor it, because what it technically does is pretty good, and it's a pretty solid absolute defense. I do run like smite on my Limbo, so I can take overground right off and stasis that enemy pretty effectively. Really, you could put this ability anywhere. I don't really care. Limbo frustrates me to no end, and so I'll put it in A tier because I think it's a generally solid effect. Loki's invisibility. Loki turns invisible. Yeah, this is going in B tier. So this is the way one of the ways Loki stays alive. And the reason I'm ranking this below Smokescreen is that it just does less, first of all, right? Its augment is completely worthless, basically. Hushing your weapons while you're invis. Great, man. Super cool. There's better ways to invest. You just put Hush, which is an Exilus mod, Silencer, whatever, Suppressor, you know how it goes. But Loki also has Safeguard Swap, or Safeguard Switch, which is just like seconds of invulnerability. Now, granted, invisibility, as we mentioned, does give you access to Crepuscular, which is pretty good. But in my opinion, Loki just doesn't need invisibility. Matter of fact, I wouldn't really be surprised, because we know damage decoy is good. We know that Safeguard Switch is good. If Radial Disarm was a good ability, I genuinely think invisibility would be removed from most Loki builds. That's not the case, but if it was, I don't think invisibility is just all that good. Giving you Crepuscular is cool. The stealth multipliers are cool. He can do a lot, but again, if his 4 was a good ability, invisibility would be removed in favor of Safeguard Switch. That's my personal opinion, but I also think it's right. So yeah, Loki's invisibility is B, keeps him alive. It's comfortable, good duration and all that. But that's about all it does for him. Mag's Magnetize is popping right into the S tier, and if you've played Mag for more than 2 seconds, you know this ability is Mag. You basically target an enemy for the tap cast, creates a little orb around them that absorbs all projectiles, and then you can either recast with the augment, which increases its range, and just blasts everything with all the stored damage. It is absolutely insane. It does so much damage. It's so funny. It absorbs enemy projectiles. It multiplies the damage. It's just absurd. Absurd levels of damage, absurd levels of range, blows everything up. I don't really use the hold cast personally, but whatever. I'm sure it's fine. Again, it's not really the main reason. Oh, I bet these little snakes are from Lavos. That's God, this game is so buggy. I love it. I don't like them crawling around like that. Anyway, Magnetize is super good. You combine it with Breeze Surge, you just break things. This ability is Mag, essentially. Obviously, Crush and Pull are great, but Mag is very defined by Magnetize and its ability to nuke, ability to keep her alive, and ability to synergize with weapons like the Plasmor, abilities like Breach Surge, the Nadaruk, all sorts of like cool little gimmicks that really break this weapon and make it fun to use. Again, even if the synergies aren't necessarily strong, Magnetize means that you can use kind of silly, gimmicky weapons that synergize with it and make that setup strong, which I think is something that's really valuable in Warframe. I like being able to play the way that I want, and Mag can allow that very often. Mesa's Shooting Gallery is going into the B tier. I think this ability is very underrated, and in my head, I kind of put it in A. Matter of fact, on my script, it reads A. Basically, what this ability does is it gives you and a teammate the Shooting Gallery buff, which basically disarms enemies, makes it so their guns don't work. This stuns infested enemies, or like disarmed enemies. and gives you a small damage buff that is additive to like Serration and stuff. First of all, MESA, the new Signa stuff. I mean, look at this shit. Oh, I love the fashion frame, dude. Looks incredible. DE is really killing it. And so basically what that does is it means that you and a teammate are giving this giant effect. On this build, it's about 23 meters, where enemies just don't shoot you. So, you know, I glaze the ability Octavia has, the Resonator, right? And that basically turns off enemy AI. This one does a similar thing. It's not quite the same. This is also a helmet ability. But one thing about a shooting gallery that I think is heavily underrated, I've talked about this in some of my earliest videos on this channel. I will talk about it when I talk about MESA in the future, and it's just really good. Muzzle Flash. This is the augment for shooting gallery that has it when you get 6 kill assists. Basically the player with shooting gallery, so yourself and then your teammate that has it. After you get 6 kills collectively, the next shot you fire will blind within 12 meters for 6 seconds. So you're basically not only just disarming enemies, but you're also, as long as shooting gallery is up, you and your teammate getting kills over and over is just repeat blinding the map, which is awesome. Getting 6 kills in Steel Path is like, you blink and 6 enemies are dead, right? And so you're basically able to constantly blind the map. Now, in my case, my strongest build that I've composed with this is shooting gallery Zaku, right? Zaku doesn't mind. Zaku likes having the CC because their defenses aren't like very absolute. I use like Arcane Circumvent and you know, the Vast on Time kind of DR overguard gimmick most of the time. And so having something like shooting gallery, which is like kind of a survivability tool, Zaku's basically constantly able to repeat blind the map. At max range with my Zaku build, this blind is 33 meters, I believe. So you're sending out effectively what is a radial blind automatically every 6 kills. That is insane. I think this ability is A tier in my head. I will give it a B tier because I can sense my own bias, but I do think shooting gallery is heavily underrated. It's just that, like, in terms of survivability, like, a lot of frames already know what they have going on, whether that's DR, whether that's invis, persistence, so on and so forth. And so shooting gallery is going to get less attention because it doesn't really give that much damage. But as a CC tool, again, CC is also kind of not great either. But as a tool to keep yourself alive, certain frames will just love shooting gallery. MESA definitely loves it, despite even having Shadow Shield. I think you should give shooting gallery a try on a couple frames, especially frames who already utilize a lot of range. That blind is some serious stuff, and that allows for finishers, that allows to proc melee crescendo, the Prisma Obex, whatever other finisher synergies you got going on. I genuinely think this is such an underrated ability, but I've talked about it long enough. Next, we have Mirage's Sleight of Hand. This basically just traps objects, so like drops, like energy orbs, ammo packs, stuff like that, and turns them into explosives, which blinds enemies and does some pretty good damage. The augment here is kind of the main thing we're talking about, right? So this turns them into like proximity mines that actually deal a ton of damage and status chance. This ability is just going straight into B tier. It is not moving from B tier likely for a very long time. This ability in like ESO or whatever is absolutely ridiculous. This is the main feature of this ability. It is meant to kill tons and tons and tons of low-level enemies, but not like super low, like decent level, like 60, 70, I believe ESO is at. It will massacre them. Absolutely. This ability is fun, conceptually very cool. Does need the augment, but the range on it is ridiculous. It's a fun, cool ability, but it is no more than like a low-level nuking tool, which is totally okay because it does that low-level nuking so extravagantly well. And I like the ability, but generally this is going to be your helmet on modern day Mirage. B tier for sure. On to NEKROS and his Terrify. This is another B tier. I think this ability is fine. It's got an enemy affected limit, which again, this is 27 enemies affected. That's pretty good. Like you're usually going to be okay with that. It's not awful. But the radius is fine. The duration is not really relevant, and the armor reduction base value is pretty good. You're basically just going to be stripping armor, keeps you alive a little bit longer. Not a bad ability by any means, but you got to keep spam casting it. And NEKROS is the king of casting animations, so a little bit annoying. I think this is a fine B tier ability. You could make the case for A if you really wanted to. I just think that it is a helmet, obviously. And Creeping Terrify is also really good. It guts movement speed, which can have some really good synergies with like Gloom and whatnot. But, which I do have a Gloom NEKROS build. It's really good. Essentially, this is to remove armor. It's just that armor strips have gotten better. in the helmet system especially. On NEKROS, this is a very good ability. But in terms of like trying to make it do things in helmets, it used to be like the main thing you used. Now we have Ophanimize, we have Theros Strike, Pillage, all sorts of stuff, and armor strips are nowhere near as necessary due to the Jade Shadow's health changes, slash armor changes. So, well, I think this is a good fitting ability on NEKROS. It's just fine. It's annoying to cast all the time. It's got that enemy limit, which will very rarely play in effect, because you're killing so many enemies nowadays, but overall, it's just a fine, solid ability with a good percentage, good features, and has like a little bit of a higher ceiling, but generally I want things like Theros Strike and Ophanimize instead. NEZHA's Blazing Chakram, I am putting into A tier. I could say B tier, but honestly the base number on this is really good, and also has some secondary effects that I think are worth noting. So we're able to create, and I wish this scaled with power strength, but it does not. We're able to create energy and health orbs with it. You throw a little chakram out, basically marks enemies with damage vulnerability, and marks them to drop health and energy orbs. Also, we have the Augment, which increases its own damage and can per bounce, while also increasing the chance to drop health orbs, which is good. We have Equilibrium, we have Purple Shards, so we're able to really boost NEZHA's energy economy that way. Also, damage vulnerability is disproportionately so disgusting on NEZHA because of the way he plays. Divine Spears is kind of your main gimmick with Divine Retribution. So you're using like Thermal Sunder or Pyrotechnics or Roar, whatever, to kind of boost that damage. And Blazing Chakram has this insane number tied to it that gives us a ton of damage vulnerability, and also you're trying to spam cast, so you're dropping health orbs, energy orbs, you're using Equilibrium to pick those up. Blazing Chakram is just, when I have like Webbed Embrace or I have like Sentient Wrath, I'm like, oh, I'm just gonna do some more damage. Hee fun. It feels less central to what I'm doing. Obviously, it's like part of it, but it feels less central. Here, Blazing Chakram feels like I'm overkilling by like a zillion, and it's so fun. But also, again, this ability contributing to, it can hit less targets essentially, but it can also contributes to more of what NEZHA has going on. So I could see this in B tier. I'm gonna personally put it in A tier because I think it's quite good. I wish it could go further. I wish the teleport on it was a cooler thing. Unfortunately, it's not. It's just a little bit of an older ability. But I think it's super solid. If you want to put it in the B tier, you could. I will personally pop it into A tier though, because the numbers on it are pretty insane. And with the very accessible Equilibrium because of Purple Shards, I'm just going to pop it into the A tier. NIDUS's Larva going into A tier. I think this ability is a really solid piece of group utility. It can now do some nuking stuff with Larva Burst. So we can see Reactivate Larva to deal 600 toxic damage in an 8-meter radius. This damage and status effect stacks for each enemy grabbed by larva. In Steel Path enemy density, you are able to drop some nukes, some warheads on foreheads, as they say. On an ability that was already like generally, on an ability that was already generally accepted as very solid utility, it's now able to do lots of damage. It's a helmet ability. It feels good to use. It's very snappy, very quick to use. And generally, I think it's solid. You could say B tier if you wanted to. It's got lower base range for sure. But the way it contributes to Nidus's kit is pretty great. But the way it allows for other kinds of grouping for frames like Protea, for example, is really good. I don't care for the ragdolling. I think that's mildly annoying. But Larva is just very easy to use, very fun to use. And it groups, and we like grouping. A lot of frames like grouping for a lot of different reasons, and in this case, I use this energy with Theros Strike, which is solid, but you could use something like, again, like Protea, like Oberon with Smite, all sorts of options you have going on. I don't personally like this ability nearly as much, because I don't like the Ragdoll, which leads me to use things like Ensnare or the Psychotid more, but I will never deny that Larva is definitely a good ability, and belongs in A tier. Noko's Bright Bonnet basically just releases this little mushroom guy that, you bounce on it, gives you energy and power strength. This is one of the single best abilities in the game now, probably. It procs Arcane Sculptor, so you can kind of put it on anyone you want. It gives you strength, which I talked about earlier in Jade section, where if you put strength on an ability that gives strength, you get more strength, and the rest of your kit becomes stronger. It's kind of hard to make Warframe abilities do more damage, and so power strength is a big way that you do that. Noko can double the Bright Bonnet buff, which is hilarious. The Arbicep can also do it. So if you're trying to snapshot something, you can bring the Arbicep with you as an arc gun and do that, provided you're using this as the helmet option. This is good for Mesa and her Peacemaker kind of playstyle, Revenant and the Danse Macabre setup. There's a lot of setups that use Bright Bonnet and turn into a turret. I use this for Corvex as well. This is just one of the single best abilities in the game. Energy is really good. You can also like kind of set it on a weird altitude where you have like a ceiling close to your head and you can bounce on it intelligently, which is pretty cool. Give yourself more energy. The numbers on this are just ridiculous, and in Noko's hands, or if you have the Arbicept, it's even more ridiculous. This ability, Bright Bonnet, is so disgusting, and it's obviously going to be going into S tier. I don't really see it moving from that position anytime soon. Arcane Sculptor, on an ability that gives you energy in the first place, means your energy economy is basically solved, right? And it also gives you power strength, which you'll always want, and something to bounce on, which is always fun. Nova's Antimatter Drop is going into B tier for me. Now, I think this ability is like generally pretty good. I can't say that I fully understand why it has the damage cap that it does and the restrictions that it does. My only guesstimate would be being mildly outdated. I use it with the Kuva hack, like most players probably do. This ability can nuke for generally around, like on my build, it nukes for a couple million, which is great. Your prime enemies, most enemies will just die. I just think that the restrictions that are built in here are pretty unnecessary. If you're priming with Molecular Prime, with Viral, Null Star Nourish, like I have here, again, you're going to get a lot of damage, but the restrictions that this ability has built in are really annoying. If you build purely for Antimatter Drop, which I don't really recommend doing on Nova, you can get a lot better outcomes. But you have to do this balance of, well, you have a damage cap, but you have the projectile multiplier, but you also need to have range, and so, to me, this ability is good, it's fun, but once you're playing Nova for a long time and you're playing her at higher levels, Wormhole's movement is so fun, and Wormhole gives you escape velocity, which is a really fun augment that's super good, and I believe goes in the Excellent slot too. So I think if you have Antimatter Drop and you're playing at lower levels, I think it's way more fun and stronger. But as you approach higher levels of Nova and you want different outcomes, I think you end up starting to Helminth off Antimatter Drop instead of Wormhole. And I wish this ability was better, honestly, because I think it's great. I think it's kind of it should really be like Collective Curse, where you're able to turn single target weapons into AoE, but it's just not. I hope this gets changed. Nova is one of the best frames in the game, so I don't see it getting buffed anytime soon, but I really do think it should, and so B tier for me, but I could see someone placing it either a grade higher or a grade lower, depending on where they are in the game. Nyx's Psychic Bolts, I think, is the A tier ability. I think Psychic Bolts is quite underrated. I do use Pacifying Bolts, the augment as well. But basically Psychic Bolts, you just fire out these like daggers essentially, and they strip armor and give it to you. So you get, you reduce the defensive enemies. This works on Overguard, unlike most defense strips, and will steal it. Now Nyx doesn't really use the defensive stats. I would say she does use the Overguard, which is nice. You basically have this gameplay loop where you are able to steal a lot of the defenses from enemies while you're in Absorb, and then you pop Absorb for the damage, and then you have like this layer of Overguard you can chill with until it's time to pop Absorb again. I'm gonna make a Nyx guide at some point because I think this frame is really underrated and super fun. But basically what Pacifying Bolts does is it allows you to proc Radiation, which lets you use your passive more conveniently, which is just 40% critical chance on your primaries and secondaries, as long as enemies are affected by radiation. And so Pacifying Bolts allows more bolts to spread and guarantee radiation, which is really valuable CC, but also good for your passive, but also good for creating more bolts to strip more enemies. You're able to strip entire rooms incredibly quickly as long as you're prioritizing the bolted targets. This is just one of the best defense reduction abilities in the game. It auto-aims, it's super convenient to use. It's insane. I think this ability is really good, just like really crazy underrated. Kind of wish it was a Helminth ability sometimes. It's really not bad. Obviously, like this annoying things where like if you have a lot of enemies, you might not be able to aim them because you don't really aim Psychic Bolts. They kind of aim for you. But as long as you're targeting your Psychic Bolt enemies, more daggers will pop out. The numbers on this ability are great. There's no range scaling, right? Which is really awesome. It means you can just kind of lob them and they'll do their thing. I like Psychic Bolts a lot. I think it's really underrated. If you said they were S tier, I'd believe you. For me, personally, it's just A tier. I think Nyx is really quite underrated. People say she's boring. I get that totally. But Psychic Bolts is definitely a huge factor of why she is quite a good Warframe. Oberon, my man. Hallowed Ground is pretty good. I'm gonna have to put it into A tier. So you get 3 patches of hollowed ground. This basically grows the grass, right? Everyone does the little 420 bit back in the day. And it procs radiation per second to enemies, which is very, very good actually. This basically is a survivability tool for your teammates. However, again, Righteous Negation is a broken passive that Oberon has, which means that this might be a pretty useless effect. However, there are now radiation synergies in the game, like secondary irradiate, and so this is one of the best kind of users of it, along with Nyx and Chaos. This is a really, really great way to get tons of radiation everywhere and allows you to use really cool synergies. Additionally, Hollowed Eruption is really interesting. It allows you to actually use this as a nuking tool. Adds a whole other scaling, right? So it scales with the radiation status and the duration of your hollowed ground. Hollowed ground is a DOT. This basically compresses that DOT and adds additional duration. So even if you don't plan on detonating your hollowed ground, you can use this to just get free duration, right? And there's reasons to not really care for a duration on Oberon, and so this could be your only independent source of duration in your build, and that would absolutely work. This is a really, really great utility ability in my opinion. Universal orbs from Universal Fallout, irradiate synergies with your pistols. Incredible. I think it's really good. I could be overrating it slightly here. It's just like radiation, when you're not trying to do damage with it, is actually really great utility and stops your teammates and objectives from getting shot, which is really not bad. On top of Reckoning, again, you can use it as a lower level nuke too. I think this ability is A tier. I think it's quite good. If you put it in B, I would totally understand, but I generally think it's really unique in what it does and really strong at what it does in terms of getting your teammates orbs, getting you damage potentially, keeping your teammates alive, objectives alive, and just serving as a really easy, accessible way of getting utility. It's got good range. I think you put like 3 or 4 of them down. I believe it's 3 now. We nerfed it. And just protecting your enemies from, or your allies rather, from status effects, from bullets, because the enemies are irradiated. It's just really good. Now, there's no guarantee, of course, that your teammates are going to stay within the hollowed ground, but because you can cover so much of the objective with it, or the area with it, it's likely you're going to be able to protect them pretty well. But again, it doesn't matter because Righteous Negation exists. I almost forgot to even mention the status effect protection. It's great, but Oberon's passive is better. Overall, A tier ability, I think it's really solid and provides some really cool synergies if you decide to build into it. Octavia's Resonator is really, really good. However, I'm putting it into A tier. I think its functionality is S tier, quite frankly. The way that it works is incredible. It's just that very few frames actually would care to have it because they already have their own survivability built in, including Octavia, who just goes invisible. This is good for strapping your mallet to it. Basically, it rolls around and distracts enemies, which is great. It's a helmet ability. It's really good. Again, I suggested it on Banshee in my Banshee guide. I think it's really good for that. But mainly this allows you to strap a mallet, which you could have 2 of if the augment. Strap 1 to the ground, 1 to the resonator. Whole lot of fun. It's a great way to get a lot of damage out of Octavia. Otherwise, Helminth, it's just a survivability tool that happens to be really, really good. But I think as the last few frames that don't have survivability get buffs or reworks, this will become less of a good Helminth ability because you just won't need it. But overall, this ability is A tier. I think it's super, super good. Its functionality is technically S tier, but because again, the context of Warframe that we're dealing with, right? I think A tier is totally acceptable. On Octavia, it's obviously going to be better because you can strap a mallet to it. But Octavia already goes invisible to protect herself. So this ability is good. I would say it's very underrated. A lot of players don't use it. I've used it on Valbon as well before. I think it's pretty good for that as well, but Valbon's whole thing is like enemy manipulation, and so sometimes it becomes less necessary. Overall, if you have a frame where you're like, man, survivability is kind of a concern for me, maybe I don't want to like shield get all the time or whatever, you should give Resonator a try. I think it's genuinely very, very slept on, and A tier ability, hands down. Pretty much no debate. If you want to put it in S tier, totally could. I would agree with you. If I was doing a Helminth list, it might go into S tier, honestly. Oraxia's Webbed Embrace. Throw down a little web, spreads out, you get 3 of them, and they have a 17.5 meter radius. Now, some players don't know how good that is. That's more than 30 meters of diameter, okay? You get 3 of these. That's insane. Roots enemies, very high damage vulnerability number. I know I have a pretty high power strength build here, of course. The base number is 50, which is like still pretty good. This basically will root enemies down, making them easier to headshot. This will provide like 1 poison proc, or 1 toxic proc, which like is 1 corrosive proc, but whatever. Generally, very, very good ability. Solid duration, easy to keep track of. The damage vulnerability is nice. And damage vulnerability is, again, kind of similar to NEZHA. Araxia generally uses the Sobek. Damage vulnerability is really good when you're doing Sobek slop, as it turns out, which is great. So I think Weapon Embrace is really solid. It is still going into B tier for me. I think it's really good. I think the root is really nice. It allows you to land headshots better if you're on like console or whatever, or if you're using a weapon that depends on landing headshots, like the Pear Gale, or the Vectis Prime Incarnate, whatever that might be. I generally think this ability is really solid though. It's a helmet. I actually use it on the Cyto 9 build. I think it's hilarious. Yeah, I like this ability a lot. I think it's, again, the ability to have 3 out. Even the helmet ability, which has a reduced range, like you have 3 of them. It's so easy to use, so fun to use, and I believe it also procs Arcane Sculptor to my knowledge, which means, again, it opens up even more synergies for casters or weapons platforms who just want to push their status, damage, vulnerability stuff to higher levels. Really good ability, B tier. Protea's Blazing Artillery. It's the Protea player. It's the biased guy. I think this ability is S tier. It just smokes the ever-living shit out of most content. I can see the claim that it's A. Absolutely. I don't really care. The base range on it is ridiculous. 30 meters, which means you can shoot out 70 meters on this, I believe, max range build. That's insane. It scales with duration, your ability to do heat procs, viral roar. It just does so much. And I'm not saying that this ability like is some insane damage solve in the way that like Sonar is, but it's just like so simple to do. You just put them down. And then if you use the element that I use, Temporal Erosion, you can shred the armor off of enemies and make it even better, right? I just think Blaze Artillery is so good. It's scaling with duration, gives you kind of like a separate, it has more damage scalings. This is a long conversation. I'll go for it. This videos are going to be more than an hour. So what makes abilities really well designed? And this is, in my opinion, a huge failure of Sirius and Orion's ultimate, Celestial Clash. Scalings are fun. I'm making a whole separate video on this, but you're getting a spoiler now, okay? Scalings are interesting because it incentivizes you to build in other ways. Protea's Blaze Artillery scales with base damage. You can do viral stuff. You can do roar stuff. You can do damage vulnerability stuff. It scales with the amount of enemies you hit. So if you use something like Ensnare has become a damage helmet. It scales with duration because the longer the turret stays up, the more it can multiply, right? That's how you make an interesting ability that like you actually kind of are asking questions on how do I optimize the damage out of this. So even though you could say make the claim that maybe Blaze Artillery is an A tier output ability, I would just say that on the virtue of how high it can go and how accessible it is, and it's not like when you're playing Protea, you can weapons platform and Blaze Artillery at the same time. The caster playstyle does not lock you out of the weapons platform. So yeah, I generally think that Blaze Artillery is insane. I would put it in S tier. If you put it in A tier, I wouldn't knock you for it. But I do think it's absolutely incredible. And in the builds that it's built for, man, it just smokes everything out. Such a fun ability, such a well-designed ability. And I love Protea to death, of course. A lot of bias here, but you know what you signed up for. This stinker. Corvex, and the Containment Wall. I'm putting this ability into C tier, which is a half emotional decision. This ability is so frustrating to use. Basically, it collapses these walls, which has good range, but the functionality of it sucks, so it almost doesn't matter. This lines up enemies, which is good for what Corvex does generally. You basically need Wrecking Wall, because what Wrecking Wall does is it strips armor and shields from the enemies you hit, and then if you hit 5 or more enemies, which you generally will with Wrecking Wall, you will restart the duration of your chain pillars and empower them, which is good for what Corvex is trying to do. So Wrecking Wall, it really should be base kit, but whatever, man. So it's damage vulnerability and then more damage vulnerability in the form of a defense reduction, which the defense reduction part is really solid if you run either enough power strength, and then you can also do like corrosive projection. Bright Bonnet here I use to push my power strength above. Yeah, Containment Wall conceptually is not a bad ability. It's just that, like, if you're going to make an ability like this that spawns the 2 walls and then collapses, you're going to have to make it, like, much better than the average grouping tool in terms of some other way, because using the ability, pressing the 2 key is a disappointing experience damn near every time, unless you're on a certain set of maps where, like, staircases or altitudes or, like, certain angles aren't a problem. Trying to use this ability in the normal course of play is miserable, especially if you're relying on it to do your Crucible Blast stuff. If you're playing, maybe a weapons platform, Corvex build, or you have another source of grouping that you use into Containment Wall, maybe the Psychic did, for example, that could be actually pretty fun, right? But it becomes a clunky process, which is most of what Corvex is in the first place. I talk about this frame in one of my videos I just made like 2 weeks ago. I think this frame is interesting, and I think Containment Wall is honestly one of his biggest like boof points. Right, it just feels like this frame, it makes the frame feel much worse to play, and I think if Containment Wall was something different or and something better, then this frame would overall have a much more positive image by the community. But unfortunately, that's not the case. It's not castable during Crucible Blast, which is super lame, and yeah, I'm pretty frustrated by this frame. But Containment Wall is where a good allotment of that frustration comes from. C tier. Oh my goodness, it's the biggest Revenant complainer, guys. Oh my, everyone jump away. This ability is a rework, and it's going in S tier. Mesmer Skin basically gives you these like shield charges effectively that completely negate any damage you take. And that's kind of it. They last until you take the damage. You get invulnerability for a duration, and that's it. It puts enemies to sleep, which doesn't matter because you're invulnerable. The augment also allows you to give these shields to allies in affinity range, so you don't even have to mod range at all. It works with affinity range, which is crazy. Gives 5 charges. They can go up to 6 if you're using Reeve, and this ability is also just recastable, so you don't have to worry about anything. This is the don't play the game ability, and I get again, I wrote a Revenant rework, which I think is actually pretty solid. They basically turned him into like more of a shield tank, and gave him more damage in exchange for not being completely invulnerable all the time. You should check that video out. It is a little like one of my like earlier videos in this channel lifespan, but I think it's quite good. So Mesmer Skin basically turns off the game, right? And that's kind of a problem. As a support ability, it's really strong. And honestly, a lot of people do make the correct assessment that like, well, KHORA's kind of invulnerable too. Like your shield gating, a lot of the really good shield gate frames end up kind of invulnerable regardless. The overguard frames are effectively invulnerable as long as you're not doing like level cap. But Mesmer Skin basically shuts the game off, and that means that you can't really create a lot of compelling challenges for Mesmer Skin without having a enemy ability that shuts off Mesmer Skin via a silence or whatever, and then every other frame who's not Revenant is getting shafted because, you know, we've had to create a Revenant countermeasure. It's just really lame. I would love to see this ability reworked into something. I remember distinctly my rework basically has it so you can recast Mesmer Skin to deplete a charge, which sends out a pulse that gives damage vulnerability, right? Just the charges are so plentiful, you can make your whole team invulnerable, and it makes the player base generally worse. Every time I go into when I was going into Infested Liches to farm a certain ephemera, like there's like 3 Revenants every time, and it's just like we're raising a oh my god, I sound like my father. Okay, like we're raising a generation of like worse Warframe players because of this stuff. And I'm not saying that like Warframe has to be the hardest game. I don't want it to be the hardest game. I want it to be somewhat engaging. I think that the Infested Lich fight is awesome. I love dodging stuff. I think it's so cool. I think most of the attacks are pretty compelling and pretty cool, especially by the stage. The actual infested enemies themselves, the stage members, I don't really, it's hard to telegraph, but like everything on the stage is super telegraphed and fun to dodge, really enjoyable. And so when Revenant's there and he's like against my will put Mesmer Shield on me, it's like I have no reason to engage anymore. And in a game that's already super easy and already super power crept, Mesmer Skin is just stupid. Anyway, I went way too long, but again, you guys know what you signed up for if you're subscribed to this channel, which you should totally do, by the way. Anyway, moving on. Moving on to Iron Skin. This is just Mesmer Skin, but well designed. This is one of the oldest abilities in the game. The way this works is basically Rhino goes invulnerable for 3 seconds, absorbing damage and converting it into Overguard. This ability, like I talked about with this, first of all, this is S tier as well. This ability is similar to Protea in the way that I described scaling, right? So what you get from Iron Skin scales with the damage you take, your power strength, your armor, right? So you have a ton of ways in the game to jack up power strength. You have a ton of ways in the game to jack up the damage you take. You have tons of ways in the game to give yourself armor. Like there's all sorts of builds. There's 2 ways to use Iron Skin, right? You can try to like get your 1 million armor skin off of a Jade Light. For me, that's not really my thing. I just slap on Iron Skin over and over like armored plating. This is just one of the best design abilities in the game. You can't recast it. Oh, but you can recast Mesmer Skin. Like, oh my goodness. Anyway, yeah, you need the augment to recast it, which is funny. Iron Shrapnel can be a nuke, I guess. Never tried that before. Anyway, yeah, this ability is simple. Basically, it's a defense mechanism that you need to build properly. It does technically just scale indefinitely, especially if you use it well, it will last longer. It's super fun to use. It's attached to a very fun frame who does like some cool stuff. And generally, I like Iron Skin's design a lot. Again, a bit simple, but its multitude of scaling and its 2 playstyles that it has attached to it are super, super cool. And getting that like multi-million overguard does have a lot. There's a lot of dopamine involved in that. And I think it's really cool. This is just one of the... This ability has stood the test of time better than like a lot of abilities, and there's a reason it's very iconic in this game, and there's a reason that Rhino is the first frame that you should try to acquire as a new player, because it's just a well-designed ability that will go... It will do the same thing effectively from minute 10 of your game to hour 10,000, and that's kind of beautiful. I love Iron Skin a lot. S tier, very, very good ability. Lots of cool scalings, lots of cool things you can do with it, but also if you decide to do none of those things, you still get a pretty valuable ability that keeps Rhino alive. Saren's Molt. I'm going to pop this one in A tier. Basically, this just kind of sheds your skin, leaves the loam behind that distracts enemies, and gives you a movement speed buff. A quite intense one, actually, like a really good movement speed buff. You move really, really fast. The reason I'm putting this into A tier is really contextual. Saren is a kind of a glass cannon. If you go to like Gloom, it's obviously a different story. There's ways to make it pretty tanky, but what Molt does is it's basically probably one of the single best shield gate abilities in the game, as it has no casting animation, no casting time. I mean, obviously those kind of go together, but also provides a distraction that makes so enemies aren't hitting you and takes the heat off of you for a second, which is basically just a perfect shield gate ability. If you wanted to, you could use Regenerative Molt. I think the numbers on Regenerative Molt need to be increased in order to make it more compelling. Let's say you're dealing with like a toxin-heavy environment, and it's a toxin that's not going to one-shot you, maybe that's more useful. I don't know. Obviously, you can use Gloom on Saren. You could do some persistent stuff if you really wanted to, but to me, Molt shield gating is just kind of the way to go. It's very high, very, high octane, very fun to do. You move super fast. Molt itself, its effect is, again, not amazing, but again, it's the fact that it costs a good amount of energy, especially with most of the way Saren builds, which means you're able to just give yourself, with catalyzing shields, you're able to just replenish your shields over and over while also distracting enemies. It's not like you have to spam the shield gate over and over and over and over and over and over. It's more so that you have to press it every once in a while to keep yourself alive, right? On DAGATH, it's like you have to keep pressing weird sides. Here you press Molt. The Molt gains a bunch of shield based on how much damage it took, and then you're able to like stay alive a little bit longer and just hang out while also moving so much faster, which if your movement's really, really good, then enemies just aren't going to hit you in the first place, and you won't have to spam this ability as much. I think it's really, really good. Really, really fun. It's changed a lot since I first played Saren a long time ago, and you could like strap spores to it and stuff. But generally, I really, really like Molt. I think it's a fun ability, and it fits Saren's aesthetic incredibly, incredibly well. A very well designed ability. Love it lots. A tier. Subaggoth Sow. This basically is the first part of the Reap and Sow combo, as you might guess. Basically, this plants a little seed into enemies that deals a little true damage DOT, and that little seed is then detonated by Reap, which we talked about in the first video. What that does is we'll basically do a % of the enemy's health as true damage, and that can be amped by things like Roar, things like Viral, other damage vulnerability multipliers, and it creates the single best trash mob, like non-boss nuke in the game by dealing 100% of the enemy's damage as true damage. Now, this is a 2-part combo, though I do think that Sow and Dark Propagation is the augment, which is basically required. It spreads Sow and allows the Shadow to actually inflict Sow as well, which is really good. It makes Shadow more usable, but still is nowhere near as good as the Roar build. Yeah, Sow is super good. I'm going to put it in A tier along with Reap, which was an A tier of its own video. You should go check that out. These two create the most Z tier broken nuke in the game. But what they do individually is really not that bad, especially Reap. But yeah, Sow's not bad. The DOT can be good for Gloom healing, and that will keep Subaggoth alive until it's time to one-shot the whole map again. So overall, pretty uninteresting ability, but it's definitely not bad. A tier for Sow, particularly with its augment as well. So for Sirius and Orion, we have, oh my god, the wings are blocking. Okay, there we go. So I'm gonna grade Astral Shell and Jade Stars here, but I do think that they're kind of both S tier abilities. I'm gonna put Astral Shell into A. So what this does, even though I do think you can make a case for S, I have not tested it nearly as long as I'd like to. I think you could make the case for S, but I'll be conservative and say A for now. Basically what this does is you would negate a hit of damage and create a clone. This clone is just going to absorb aggro forever, It's got a cooldown, but as long as the cooldown is longer than the duration, or is shorter than the duration, you just keep getting the clone. And the clone has an aggro pull radius of like 30 meters. Kind of insane. So overall, really, really good ability. You kind of want to see it as like an automated mult, which isn't explicitly a better thing, because again, you have less control over the way it functions. You don't have to shield gate with it, which is cool because it does negate the hit that procs it. But that also makes it a little less reliable, and has you doing less as a player. But overall, I think it's very, very good. This also procs Arcane Sculptor, which means you just have automated. you have aggro pull from a clone, automated Arcane Sculptor, which is just automated 175% efficiency at all times, and that happens to be really, really good. So Astral Shell I'll put into A, but I'm fairly certain it's S tier. I just haven't tested it enough, and I like to give you guys like my opinion based on what I've tested, even if I haven't done the thorough testing yet. I'll just be very transparent with you. Jade Stars is S tier. I love this ability more than like a lot of things in this life. Obviously on release it was bad. Now it's pretty good. They removed the LOS thing, but they added an LOS check to Jade Stars, but I never abused any of that, so it never affected me. Obviously, I saw like a 300 kpm Saren setup. Of course it's going to do that. And granted, that was pretty broken, even though I found it super cool. The way Jade Stars works is basically it will tag on to any hit that you deal with, like, or most hits that you deal with weapons or from abilities. So in your head, imagine like Grasp of Lok, the guns from Zaku, imagine Protea's turrets, Protea's shrapnel grenades. I talk about it in my HOLLOV video. That build is really good. And so basically, if you have like a high fire rate weapon or a Warframe, Jade Stars is basically an ability that is about uptime. If you can constantly deal hits, no matter how small, and they proc Jade Stars can stay up, right? I believe like you get the Jade Stars, you get all of them back every second or something like that. So basically, if you're able to keep Jade Stars up, keep those motes flying out, then you're succeeding at using a Jade Stars build properly. Which is really cool because there's a lot of like weaker abilities in Warframe that deal a lot of hits, but they deal weak hits. And so if you can tie Jade Stars to that, it's a really, really good way to add AoE into your build, while also, because yeah, if you have enemies like grouped up together and you're hitting them with like a gun that's like kind of weak but has high fire rate, the radius on Jade Stars has a radius built in, so you're creating AoE there too. I really think Jade Stars is one of the best abilities they've added to Warframe in a very long time. I think it's super, 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 super cool. I think it's literally in GOAT contention with like Roar, Nourish. It has slots in builds where those helmets aren't nearly as strong. Jade Stars has these niches where it's just excellent, and then also can be really good in like the average build as well. I am generally very, very impressed with Jade Stars. You have like Arcane Hotshot and stuff that it works with, all sorts of stuff. Also the ability to like look super sick and sound super sick. Basically, I love Jade Stars. That's really it. S tier for Jade Stars, A tier for Astral Shell. But if you said S tier Astral Shell, I wouldn't really bat an eye. It's more of that I don't really know where I want to put Astral Shell, because most of my builds in the current day have their survivability kind of figured out. But yeah, what do I know? Anyway, S tier for both of these abilities in my head, but it's really A tier for Astral Shell and S for Jade Stars. Stynax's Theros Strike. This is some real good stuff. I'm going to be popping it into the A tier. I think this is one of the better. It's a really, really good defense strip. Basically, it's going to, the 50% defense reduction is really, really good. Easy to get to 100%, pretty accessible, and Stynax wants that strength anyway. This is also a helmet ability. Most Warframes want that strength anyway as well. Just 200%, real accessible. This is going to knock enemies away. This can knock disruption targets away. Really, really good. It also has a heal tied to it. So if you're doing stuff with persistence, this can actually have some pretty good mileage. Like as you can see here, 259 health per enemy struck. So if I hit 2 targets there, that's a second of persistence time I bought myself. That's a massive amount of healing for an ability that also strips armor and shields. Additionally, I think Theros Lethality is quite frankly insane. One of the most underrated augments ever. Increases critical damage by 100% on enemies you hit. Critical damage bonus is doubled for spear guns. Critical damage can be really annoying to get. Critical chance usually comes a lot more plentiful. And so if you're using a spear gun especially, which now the Apprentice Prime and the Tenet Ferox are both really, really, really good options. And if you're using it on Stynax especially, who already gains critical chance, you're going to get a lot of output out of Theros Strike. whether it's Helminth or not. I think this ability is really good. It's quite fast. If you can get some casting speed, it's even better. And I love this ability tons. It's just a really excellent debuff. Good CC, good healing if you're doing persistent stuff. And that's about it. Love this ability tons. I think it's really, really good. I might be overrating it slightly. You could really make the case for B tier if you wanted to, but I do love Thero Strike. It tends to be kind of the finishing piece in a lot of my builds where I want maybe a little bit of more defensive stuff going on, more armor strip, more utility. Thero Strike just tends to fit its way in there. Again, could be a slight overrate, but I liked it a lot, and I'm putting it into A tier. Temple and their Overdrive, going into the B tier. I think this ability is not really that bad at all, actually. Like, for my build currently, this will end up providing 150% flat critical chance, which is a lot. It's also a very accessible ability, provided you've subsumed off pyrotechnics, which I generally do. This is going to be your main way to quickly proc your backbeat and get... for me, I use the augment, which is Rhythm Guard, which gives me Overguard. So this becomes a source of Overguard for me. And also gives you ammo for Lizzie, if you're using Lizzie, which you probably will be if you're going to be playing Temple. Overdrive basically just gives critical chance vulnerability. The problem is, it's just hard to hit all the time in terms of, like, you're just moving around a lot. If the backbeat bothers you, which the backbeat is one of my favorite mechanics in the whole game, so I certainly don't feel that way. But it's only a 100-degree angle instead of 180 in front of you, which is annoying. Weird limitation, I don't know why they keep doing that, but the number on it is like solid. It means that you can use certain weapons that have lower crit chance. It's just not nearly as reliable as something like HARROW, who can tie that buff to themselves and then go use the new core. In this case, you have to just keep hitting not only backbeats, but also hitting the overdrive 100 degrees. It's got good range of like 30 meters in this build, which is just a lower range build. I think this is just the same thing as like Sentient Wrath, Webbed Embrace, like similar stuff where it's basically damage vulnerability. In this case, it's critical vulnerability, which is not, it's not that it's bad, it's just like different, right? There's a lot, the ceilings on it can go pretty high, provided you're using a synergy with it. But it also, Overdrive is just a great way to make Temples get work the way it's intended. I could see someone placing this ability lower. I could see someone putting this into C tier, but generally I think it's pretty solid. I'm not too unhappy about it, but it's fine. Titania and Tribute. Basically, this has you cycle through buffs, and you affect an enemy with it, and you pick up the buff. It's actually, like, the way that Tribute works is very, very cool. I just think the buffs are not great, and that's really it. Like, I don't really get some of the buffs. This ability is quite outdated. You have, like, some DR, which is pretty cool. You have some hit chance stuff. You can buff your companion, which is nice, but I think your companion goes away when you Razor Wing, so I don't get, maybe I'm stupid, I don't know. And then you can lower the speed of enemies. So, like, this has a really good duration, this has a good effect radius. Like, there's good stuff about Tribute. The buffs just need to be altered. I think the way Tribute works is fun. You're like playing like Mario Kart, running through, picking up items, basically. Right? That's how I see it, at least. I just think this ability needs a rework. I'm putting it in C tier. I'm sure, like, real Titania players, there's more fake Titania players that just play for Broken, Zada's Whisper Blast, or Thermal Sunder, or, like, speedrunning. They don't actually like Titania, so they're not going to worry about Tribute. If there's, like, real Titania players in my audience, go ahead and, like, let me know if this ability is actually good. I don't think it is. I've read up on it quite extensively. I just think it's unnecessary for what Titania's trying to do already in her strongest states. And especially if you're asking a Warframe player to put an extra effort in terms of picking up those buffs for buffs that are mediocre, I think that's kind of unfair. So I would put this in rework and C tier. Trinity and her Energy Vampire are headed into the B tier. Basically, this has you select a target, and they pulse out energy over time. If you reduce the duration, then the energy comes out quicker. If you kill the enemy, all the target comes out at once. This deals % health, true damage, which has a really, really strong build. Fun build, more than it is strong, but it's still quite strong. Where you nuke with Energy Vampire by dealing that % health, true damage outwards. Really, really fun. Has really strong range tied to it. Back in the day, this was like a mandatory ability to have in your comp, but energy econ has been pretty solved since then, which is why I'm putting it into B tier. I think the amount of energy it gives is absolutely ridiculous. Its ability to nuke with Marked for Death is hilarious, but to me, it has the makings of just a B tier ability. I think that its support capabilities are good for, like, Trinity. Like, they help Trinity quite a lot. They let her cast her abilities without thinking at all, which is really great. But ultimately, like, that's kind of it. Your goal is to help your teammates, and your teammates don't really use your help most of the time. So unless you're nuking with it, that's kind of, it's just kind of a energy backpack for you, essentially. Again, unless you're using it to nuke. So it's solid, but to me, it's just a B tier ability. Used to be a whole lot better back in the day. Moving on to Remedium. This is Uriel's second ability, and it basically just heals you and your demons. This healing can move into overshields, which is really, really good. This also includes Gulfagor. This is the helmet ability of Uriel that is really, really weird to make work on other warframes due to the way it works, right? So like you heal based off your max health, but that can move into shields, so you have to want to shield tank, but also have enough health to have a good percent to steal from. Really, you just use this on Uriel, and it's really good. Obviously, Gulfagor is really strong, gives you so much energy, basically single-handedly solves your energy problem with a single purple shard, which is super good. Healing your demons is a very necessary part of your kit. Try not to weigh that too hard, but if you have any kind of like DR or any other external survivability, Remedium being able to basically pull you into max overshields, max health really effectively, is super strong. I haven't really played Uriel at super high levels yet, so I'm curious to see if Remedium lasts as a very strong tool. My brain just kind of sees it as like a blessing with a faster or with a slower casting animation, so I anticipate it will be quite good. But we'll have to see. I think Remedium is A tier. It's a very solid ability. It keeps you, your demons alive, keeps Uriel's kit functioning, and works as way better of a survivability tool than I honestly expected. Moving on to Valkyr and Warcry. So all Warcry does is gives you armor and attack speed. Quite a good amount of it, but it's just armor and attack speed. And this is a B tier ability in my view. This is one of the biggest attack speed steroids in the game, and it's also available as a helmet option. And there are a lot of frames who would really like this, actually. It's super fun. The one I see a lot of is BARUUK. The only problem with Warcry is that Wrathful Advance exists, which is annoying, but Wrathful Advance is just probably the single best melee ability in the game, and it's available in the helmet, and so you take it. But Warcry is a definitively very fun ability. The armor increase is quite good. It means you can, if you want to try to push into persistence territory on like a melee frame, you could definitely benefit from doubling your armor, right? That could get you a lot closer to the persistence threshold. And attack speed is a very good stat. It's just not as good as like 200% flat crit chance, unfortunately. Eternal War makes it so you don't have to recast this ability, which is incredibly good. And this is just a slightly above average ability. It's good. It's solid. We like it on Valkyr. I haven't done much on putting it on other frames, but it's generally just a fine, good ability that doesn't really need any changes. Vauban's Mind Layer. Now this ability is a little bit lengthy. Basically you have two orbs, one that you throw out and it kind of basically strings two enemies together on top of the orb and also acts as a turret, and then the other one you place on the ground, you hop over it, and it will send you flying, give you movement speed, and basically like a roar buff, essentially. Which is pretty good. It's not, granted, it's not a very high number, right? But it's extra damage, which we all like, right? I would say this ability is B tier. Now, Vauban's current strong suit, in my opinion, is either Vortex Slop with like Smite or Photon Strike or a variety of things, right? Even just weapons. Or Bastille and Tesla Bank. I think Bastille and Tesla Bank is an insanely strong combo, and to me, Mind Layer doesn't super play into those things. It definitely works with it, but the problem is like your Bastille already kind of CCs enemies for you, your Vortex already CCs enemies for you. You get some extra damage from Overdrive Pad, and the movement speed's I guess nice. I wish it was Parkour Velocity instead. The max targets on the Tether Flechette Orb makes it a little bit awkward sometimes. If you're a higher level Vauban player, I think you're definitely getting a lot more mileage out of Mind Layer, but also you don't really super have to. Vauban's kit with 1-4 and a Subsume generally does the trick. Mind Layer is a good ability that does things, but it's simply not necessary. So it's B tier to me. I play quite a bit of Vauban, but take a little bit of a break from him. But I think this ability is quite good. It's just that like if you're going to try to build around it, because the Flechettes do max essentially like scaling with level damage, which is quite good. You can buff them with other things like Nourish or with Arachne. But generally, I don't think that kind of playstyle is worth it, because they're pretty single target focused, and I think they're much better if you sit there and let them do their thing while you vortex, that's kind of the nice thing about this ability, why it really goes in B tier instead of C tier, is it's not a very active ability. It's very set and forget. Casting speed's quick enough, they're useful enough, And I think really good Valbon players will get more mileage out of this, and even casual Valbon players can just throw down a bunch of random little turret flechettes, and they will do a great job at killing a couple enemies, you know, every once in a while, really, really easily, and that's about it. B tier ability, kind of the definitive B tier ability in my head. Volt Speed is going into A tier. I think this ability is incredibly, incredibly good. You can make the case for it being S. I just think that, so speed is similar to Molt, and that no casting animation, no casting speed, or no casting time rather. And so it's a really great shield getting tool, and Volt likes that. However, Volt also has, you know, provided you're not level capping, right? Volt also has capacitance from discharge, which is just really great shielding. He has electric shield as well, and so he has options, as well as Saren tactically does too, to tank in different ways. And I think that speed's not really as much of a necessity. Also, doesn't provide that clone that Molt provides. I really wish this ability gave fire rate. It's really weird that it doesn't, in my opinion. But you move insanely fast. It's very fun to speedrun with this ability. A lot of players don't like it because they don't like moving that fast. The reload speed's quite good. It's just a good, effective, quick ability. Giving it to your teammates is pretty cool, but in my opinion, this is very much an ability for Volt himself. And it plays pretty well into what Volt's doing. I could see someone placing this maybe in S, maybe in B, but to me, A just makes like perfect sense. Shocking speed with like a companion build is really funny. But overall, Volt's got better stuff going on than speed, but speed definitely helps. Moving really, really fast is something that's generally quite good in Warframe, and reload speed is a stat that can really like bog down certain weapons, just kind of like I mentioned with Harrow. The duration's on it's good, and again, it is a shield gating ability that is inexpensive. So, thumbs up for me, A tier. Varuna and her Fangs of Raksh are going right into S tier. This is kind of Varuna's main shebang. Now, obviously, Ulfrun's Descent has gotten a lot better over time, but I still think Fangs of Raksh is one of the better ways, even if you are using Ulfrun's Descent. Fangs of Raksh is just an insanely crazy tool. Shroud of Dynar's Augment Prey of Dynar is a huge part of why this is good, and so I was tempted to put it into S, but honestly, even without the augment, this ability is still able to do a lot with like her kit. It's definitely a lot better with the augment, but here, like, if you are, whether you're doing like status nuking stuff, which you can absolutely do, with a lot of cool external synergies that allows you to just treat this as a nuke button. There's obviously some RNG involved there, but it's pretty you know, like you can roll very quickly. Obviously, like, you'll have some bad rolls and not nuke anything, but it's very easy to just go into the next target, right? Or if you're just using this to prime enemies for a slam build, then you can also do that. Varuna's kit is pretty well versed in both casting and melee setup, slam primarily. And so this ability does both of those things and does both of them at a S tier level, in my opinion. The priming is great, and so is the nuking. Obviously, like, the nuking will require a little bit of different investment, and you're going to want to have a slam weapon, probably, if you're doing the slam stuff, but generally this is just a low investment, easy way to nuke maps really effectively and have a lot of fun. So range on it's crazy. Obviously, again, it does want Shroud of Dynar, but seeing as neither of those are really helmet abilities and they both kind of work in the same kit, and this really feels like it should read, sometimes this feels like it should read as an augment for Fangs of Raksh, but it's not. It's for Shroud of Dynar, so weird technicality, but I think this Fangs of Raksh is definitely S tier ability on Varuna. It's probably Varuna's best ability. Looking at Wisp and Will-O-Wisp, I could definitely see somebody wanting to place this into B, but I'm going to be personally placing it into A. I think a lot of, especially if you're using Cataclysmic Gate, this is what a lot of players would remove, as opposed to Soul Gate, which you normally remove. I think that Cataclysmic Gate is actually a pretty solid augment, especially with good investment. Will-O-Wisp basically just sends the clone of Wisp forward. You can then recast, teleport to it, and gain 3 seconds of invulnerability. That's really good. That's something you can just recast right away to just gain. If you have like a negative status on you, you can just press 2 twice and you'll be all set. But the main thing with this is that Will-O-Wisp also, Wisp's kit design, just a little spoiler for the channel. In the next few months, I'm going to be doing a Warframe design tier list. Wisp is one of the best designed frames, and so Will-O-Wisp is a very basic distraction ability, right? First of all, it procs your your invisibility, so like your passive, which like lets you turn invisible while you're in midair, this makes you invisible. So this allows you to use Crepuscular. But also if you cast Breach Surge while your clone is out, your clone will also cast Breach Surge. If you cast Breach Surge while you're teleporting through Reservoir with a Will-O-Wisp active, you are getting like the entire room Breach Surged. It is absolutely insane. And even though, again, I think this ability can get helmet off in some cases where you are using Cataclysmic Gate, this ability synergizes with Wisp's kit incredibly well. It synergizes with Crepuscular, which I mentioned is a huge value package that you want to be able to easily add to a kit, and also just gives you, again, that Breach Surge synergy on command and vulnerability. I'm never ever going to complain about it. You could also argue it's good for mobility, but I mean that might not be the case all the time. So yeah, definitely a tier ability. I could see somebody wanting to put it a little bit lower, but I think if you're a Wisp player, then you know this ability is pretty solid when you want to try to use it. Wukong and Cloudwalker. Cloudwalker is headed right into the A tier. I could see somebody putting it in S tier for sure. This weapon's utility, this ability's utility is just so absurd. This is the Spy Mission Speedrunner 3000, and obviously there's like alternatives now, but I don't really think any of them are nearly as good as Cloudwalker. Like, Cloudwalker just feels very easy to use. And while I'm convinced that like really skilled players, especially on less complex maps, can definitely outpace Cloudwalker, if you invest in Cloudwalker properly and use it to speedrun things, you are just stupid fast. You can use it for the stun. You can turn your teammates invisible, which is something I've never really seen, but that's very curious. I would probably like to see a build with that at some point. Cloudwalker is just the like, you're just in creative mode. You're just like damn near no clipping through the map, and it is very, very funny. It will heal you. It will heal your clone if you're in like a combat situation, but usually what I recognize this for, it kind of gives you like a quick reprieve away from enemies, but also is a incredibly good utility movement tool when you're doing that kind of content, namely spy content. So overall, this is just a really, really solid ability. I would be curious to see, I would like to see Enveloping Cloud maybe give the invisibility to Wukong himself, but whatever. This ability is super, super good, both as a piece of movement utility and also a way to just like stay alive while you're fighting as Wukong. Zaku's Grasp of Lok. So basically you just steal the weapons from enemies and they sit around you, and this scales with range, and you usually get 16 weapons. You can get up to, I believe, 33 if you get that range doubler, and that's really, really good. Now this weapon, or this, hello, my goodness, my brain's rotting. I've been doing this for like an hour and a half. This ability got basically an indirect nerf with the Jade Shadow's armor change. This weapon deals damage based on the enemy's level, based on enemy's HP, right? And so the problem is that HP got a huge buff, and armor got nerfed. So this used to be cool because it would basically go through armor, right? But now you have so much more health to deal damage to that it's a bit of a problem. Now granted, this ability still does good damage. It's very automated. You don't have to do anything yourself. You can viral prime, you can use Jade Stars. There's a lot of, like, this ability was not even remotely affected by the Jade Stars nerf because this thing already has an LOS check within its own right, and that's a really fun way to use it in my opinion. You know, Zaku can afford to put Jade Stars on the build. So you have Jade Stars, Grasp of Lok for your trash mobs, and you have Zada's Whisper for killing like priority targets, which would be used. That's like super good. This ability is still A tier in my heart. I think there's a point where it was S tier probably before Jade Shadows. Zaku used to be a whole lot stronger. I think Zaku is still very, very strong, but really nowhere near compared to like pre-Jade Shadows changes. They just do a lot less damage now. But Grasp of Lok is still really good, and because it's just such an automated process on top of a frame that already has Zada's Whisper for single target headshot, blast, synergies, all that good stuff, and who already has pretty good survivability built in, I would say that Grasp of Lok definitely belongs in A tier. Quite easy ability to pilot and to get a lot of value out of. Next, second to last, we have Yoreli and Marilena. So Marilena is Yoreli's little K drive. She rides around or doesn't ride around depending on which augment you use. So what Marilena does is absorbs damage this is considered damage redirection, which is very key. I made a video on Arcane Circumvent a long time ago. You check that out. Basically, it discusses how damage redirection works with Overguard, and that it does work with it. Normally, DR, damage reduction, doesn't work with Overguard, but because the damage is being redirected, something in the code basically causes this to be redirection, which means if you get overguard from other sources, like circumvent, you're able to basically turn what is 15,000 overguard into a whole lot more than that. You also get iframes from Miralina, which is really good, and so that's solid. If you can ride Miralina and you know what you're doing, that's good. Let's talk about the two augments, because that basically it kind of turns Urelli into like a subclass situation. So the first augment is Miralina Guardian, and this is the one that has you ride Miralina. So when you eliminate enemies that are C-snared, you heal Miralina's health, which is very good. Again, we've established that Miralina has a decent health bar, and she's taking damage for you, so we want to heal her. When we heal Miralina, we gain 200% reload speed and 200% fire rate on secondary weapons. That is really, really good. That is for 20 seconds. That is affected by mods, so 50 seconds here. And unfortunately, the reload speed and fire rate are not affected by strength. But that's a very good flat value they have there, so I'm not going to complain. This is insane. If you are using Miralina, again, you also already have, when you're moving, you already get 200% critical chance for your secondary weapons. So a little bit weaker on Enervate setups, kind of, but that's fine. Really, really good. Now, if you really cannot be bothered, you can use Loyal Miralina, and that basically has Urelli no longer riding Miralina. Instead, Miralina actually has like an automated turret, basically, that just casts C-snares on a 2-second cooldown, scaling with efficiency. So that can end up being like a 0.4-second cooldown of C-snares. The C-snares can combine with your kit C-snares, and that can cause like 600% damage vulnerability, basically, which is insane. So Miralina really does belong in S tier, I think. You can make the case for A tier if you really don't like her, but again, Miralina has two of the best designed augments in the game, in my opinion. It really lets you choose how you use Miralina, and I think that's incredibly interesting. Kind of reminds me of like Incarnans, where you can kind of choose how you decide to use a weapon. With Miralina, the two augments give you a choice on how you can elect to have your playstyle changed by Miralina, which is really, really interesting. And obviously, that's because Miralina is quite a complex ability, quite a aggressive ability in terms of how you have to use Miralina. There are some tile sets where using Miralina is awful, legitimately unplayable, and there's some where it's really fun. And so like having that augment choice be yours and having multiple loadout slots is a really, really, really fun thing to do. And I think Miralina deserves S tier just for that flexibility, and also again the quality of survivability you gain when you're using overguard synergies and just having 90% DR and all that stuff. It's a lot of really good things attached to a DR ability. Wrapping it up here with Zephyr's Airburst. This basically is a little projectile that fires out and groups enemies or disperses them. Now, I don't know why you'd ever want to disperse enemies, so we're just going to kind of discuss the grouping here, and we're going to discuss Airburst rounds. I think this ability kind of lands into B tier for me. Again, with a lot of like the more average grouping abilities. Decent radius, very snappy, very easy to use. Again, it's casted from range, unlike Mag's pull, so you can shoot the projectile out and group the enemies where you want to group them, which I think makes, again, if you're like melee, pull is fine, but if your setup is more like ranged, I think things like Airburst, things like Larva, things like Ensnare are just a little bit better. Airburst rounds is really good. So you get this power strength scaling, secondary damage buff for a duration when you hit enemies. So this does have a cap, I believe, of what is like 400%, I think, if I recall correctly. 400%, it's no joking matter, right? And that's a good amount of damage. You're getting a secondary only, which is a little bit annoying, but it is, if you have some sort of secondary setup with Zephyr, it's going to be really, really good. Zephyr already has a lot of ability to buff damage. Airburst is a tool that, this is her helmet option, by the way, so I wouldn't really take it over a lot of things, but it's definitely a fun and easy ability to use. And if for some reason you want to disperse enemies away from you, you can do that now. That's an option that Airburst provides you. But this ability works incredibly well with Tornado, as it lets you group the enemies into the tornadoes to have them spread their damage and do all of their weird spaghetti code stuff. So that's incredibly fun. I see a lot of players generally might take Airburst off or take Tailwind off if they don't feel like dealing with the passive, but I think Airburst is generally good. It's B tier, it's solid. Within Zephyr's kit it does a lot, but there's a lot of situations where you want grouping, and Airburst might be an easy way to do it. Zephyr's a very easy frame to acquire and to feed to the helmet, and so that might be a really good choice rather than like Nidus or KHORA. So overall, nice, easy, accessible grouping, and that does wrap up all the Warframes. Let's record the outro now. Okay, holy moly, my voice is so unbelievably shot. Hopefully you guys enjoyed. Thank you guys so much for watching. This is obviously gonna be a longer one. Wow, that was it. Yeah. If you have any comments, obviously drop them. If you have any thoughts, I don't claim to know everything about this game. Obviously, not a lot of you guys are gonna make it this far in the video. I don't claim to know anything. I obviously do like a good handy bit of research. But every Warframe has a lot going on, especially with the unintended features or bugs that DE has that makes them a lot stronger. For example, I would think KOUMEI was pretty mid if I didn't know. If I didn't extensively read the wiki over and over, right? Since I haven't made, I only really research the frame super hard when I have a guide to make. And so because I've only made like probably 10 guides or less by now, I don't know everything I'd like to know. And so if there's anything I've missed, now would be the time to educate me. I remember early on, I made a huge mistake thinking Null Star was a bad ability. That was funny. And so yeah, I'm here to learn as well as you guys. Hopefully you've learned something. Leave a comment if you have. Sub, like, hype, all that stuff. And I will see you in the next video. If you watch this one all the way through, man, I love you. Thank you so much. I don't pick favorites, but I have a favorite. If you've made it this far, you're my favorite. Talk to you soon. Love you guys. Bye-bye.